Very good.
Okay.
Okay. We're talking today with Marc Aronson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay. Now, Marc, can you start us off with some background on yourself, and to begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in 1949, September 8th, 1949.
All right. And what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
Father was an insurance agent. My mother was a housewife. But my father also ran, in what I do now, the nation's first notary public association. But we started in the insurance and surety business in 1885. My grandfather, when I came into the business, my uncle was here, my father, my aunt. My mother worked here a little bit over the years. I've had two younger brothers here. So everybody's been in the business from one side to the other.
Okay. What kind of schooling did you have before the service?
Public schools up through 9th grade in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, a place called Bethel Park in the suburbs. And then I repeated 9th grade again at my father's insistence, and I spent 4 years in military school, Augusta Military Academy in the Shenandoah Valley. So I went 9th grade to 12th grade. And after that was Vietnam. Of course, we'll go through that when I came back from Vietnam. I spent a year and a half in college at Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York, and just went home one day.
Okay. Well, let's go back to the early part here. So when did you start the military school?
1964.
Okay. And what reason did they have for sending you there?
Oh, my father was trying to get me to get good grades.
Okay.
That's the stated reason anyway. I grew up in a house that children to be seen, not heard. And my father said jump, I just asked how high. It's an old joke, but that's pretty much the way it was. And he said, you're going to military school. Years later, my mother, of course, told me she wasn't real happy about that. But off I went.
Okay. Now, what was that experience like?
Oh my, that's a whole other interview. The ultimate question is, would you send your own son to the same military school you went to? I still don't know the answer after all these years. I was sent there under the premise of improving my education. The schools in Bethel Park had the normal amount of students, which were 30 to 35 to class. Military school classes were 15 to 18, which actually I heard just recently on NPR somewhere that was actually a really good class size. And we were ahead of our time. I was also probably had, what do the kids have now, ADD or something like that, where they run around and you can't stop them. I probably was an early adopter of that, long before anybody knew what it was. And I'm still that way now. I still don't sit still very well.
How did that go over in a military school?
You did what you did. You did what you were told in military school. I was used to taking orders. I mean, my father was my father, so I did what I was told to do. And military school was an interesting experience. I was a northern boy in a southern environment, so that was different. I went down there and I heard of something called Dr. Pepper. Never heard of it before in Pittsburgh, of course. So they ate something called grits. Never had that either. And what were they? Oh, moon pies. Never heard of moon pie before. So there were differences. There were also differences between. We were a segregated school. The gentleman who ran it would not let African Americans, as they're now called, and he called them blacks, of course, and other things. They wouldn't let a black garbage man on the grounds, much less a student, of course. So it was segregated. It was, we had a dormitory. It was modeled after, a little bit after West Point. The uniforms were modeled after West Point. The school was put together after the Civil War, where I understand the South lost, although they still don't really believe that. And so they put together a school for veterans to teach their children they wanted to be taught. When I was there, it was right during the middle of the Vietnam War, of course. At the time, the country had about 500 military schools. Last time I heard there was maybe 35. The whole Vietnam experience killed the idea. But I spent 4 years. Like everything in life, I was in the middle. I graduated, I think, 35 out of 70.
How much actual military training did you get there?
A lot of military training.
What
We
kinds
had
of things?
ROTC instructors. We had military classes. I don't remember much of them anymore. I was on the drill team my last year, something called Roller Rifles. It was hard to get onto, but I managed to make it. I was a short fellow in the very end of the group. We practiced. We carried M1s. I can still tell you about something called M1 thumb, which the younger generation maybe doesn't know too much about. The drill team carried Springfield 03s, but we had to strip those M1s down and put them back together blindfolded, just like they do when I went to basic training with M16s. So some things didn't change. We went on marches, we did this, we did that, marched in parades, but it was all military. Just like they do at West Point and VMI and some of these other places, I forget exactly what they called first-year students. They called them plebes and things at the military schools, but I had to learn to eat a square meal, and I had what's called bracing, and we had various harassing maneuvers for the first-year students. They don't do that anymore, of course, but at the time,
And then during this time, so you're there like sort of 64 to 68.
68, yes.
Okay, now that's the period. In 64, we didn't have much by of ground troops in Vietnam. We did have some forces, air forces and things over there already, and then 65 is when they start going in large numbers. And of course, it keeps escalating after that. How much attention did you pay to that while you were in school?
I would say virtually no attention to it. We had no televisions, no radios. You had allowed to have a record player. There were about 3 kids in a room, but each night you had study times, and the officers, the student officers and the teachers would walk around and look through your windows, and you better look like you were studying anyway. So there's only limited time to listen to a radio or to play a record player, and except for on the weekends. And even the weekends, much of your time was taken with inspections or parades, especially on Sunday, marching off to church, or if you're Jewish, off to synagogue. No, I didn't get the newspaper. No, we were living around the little world. I mean, obviously I went home every summer, but I was a middle-class kid in a middle-class neighborhood, and my father was in the reserves. He eventually got out as a bird colonel after 28 years. My uncle did the same thing. My other uncle was, as we call him, a spy in the Air Force. So the military concept wasn't foreign to me, and no, but we didn't talk about it or debate about it much amongst ourselves in school that I remember anyway.
Okay. And at what point then do you actually enter the service?
I'm sorry?
When do you enter the service?
Well, when I came out of military school, the question was I going to go to college? Well, I was 35 out of 70. I never was a book-learning kind of a fella. And I just made up my own mind, actually, one day. I went downtown Pittsburgh, where we're sitting now, to the Federal Building, and signed up on what was called the 120-day delay plan. So 120 days later, I had a report. And so it's exactly, I graduated, I don't know, about June 6th or so, I suppose, of 64. And I think it was September 16th, maybe a week, something like that, 16th, 23rd, after my birthday, a few weeks after my birthday, I reported downtown.
Okay. Now, is that when you get your physical, or had you done that already? Or
No, that's when I got my physical. I originally, of course, you sign on the dotted line, and I took the streetcar downtown. Didn't come with my parents. I came down with 3 or 4 young ladies, friends of mine from the neighborhood. We all took the streetcar down. They were convinced that I was going to go to Vietnam and be killed dead very quickly, and so they spent most of the time crying. And I can tell you a short, funny story. We all hugged each other in the lobby of the Federal Building, but the reception area was up on the 20th floor or someplace. And so you go upstairs and you get mustered around, and eventually you're pretty much left in your underwear because they're measuring you and giving you shots and doing this and doing that. And we're all sitting around a little room, pretty much the size of what we are now, on benches against the wall. And I remember the kid poking to my right. He poked and he said, "Do those belong to you?" And I look out, and damn if the girls had not taken the elevator up when they weren't supposed to. They took the elevator up, and they're looking at the room trying to see if I'm in there. And so there I am sitting in the old briefs, and all the girls out there like waving, like, bye, bye girls. So, but that was that. We got eventually dressed, and I remember landing. I don't remember the trip really.
okay. Before that, did you notice anybody, when you were doing physical, was there anybody there who was trying to sort of scam the system or?
Oh, there were conversations about, could you hear, or could you talk, or could you walk, or that sort of thing. But I don't remember anything special.
Okay.
No, not really. Not really.
And then where do they send you for basic training?
Fort Jackson, South Carolina, wonderful Fort Jackson, South Carolina. I remember, I don't remember how I got down. I guess we probably flew down. I don't remember anymore. But I do remember getting a haircut. I think it was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Lined you up, sat you down. And a lot of kids, of course, that was the 60s. A lot of kids had hair. Of course, I was probably had the shortest hair in the room coming out of military school. I was used to short hair. And, but it wasn't short enough for the Army. And they sat you down, and you were bald as a bowling ball.
And how about how long do you think you spent processing there before you started training?
Not very long at all. I haven't thought about that in years, but that was, you know, probably 24 hours. I mean, you were shipped in and assigned to a unit, and I remember the next, I guess it was probably the next day. It couldn't have been more than 24 to 40 hours later. But I do remember sitting on the in the area where we were stationed. The street was a slanted street going up. It had all these old World War II barracks that were still heated by coal, although it was South Carolina. It wasn't like you had to heat a lot of it, but nevertheless. And I do remember sitting on the street with a bunch of other young men and a sergeant who at the time looked pretty close to God, and barking orders and asking questions, because I made two, well, I won't say they were mistakes, but you know, early on they say don't volunteer. Well, what do I know? I'm an old Boy Scout too, so somebody asked me a question, I answer it. And I do remember two questions that first day that I answered, which basically benefited me. First question was, the gentleman held up a long pole with a point at the end of it with a little flag and said, does anybody know what a guidon is? Well, having gone to military school, of course, I knew what a guidon was. And so I kind of raised my hand and looked around, and not too many other people were raising their hands, I can tell you. Nobody else knew what it was. So I immediately got assigned the ownership of that. And later on, maybe I can tell you how that actually benefited me. But the other part of that story is the guidon had a little chrome tip to it. And I was told that under my life in my hands, that every night I was to unscrew the tip from that guidon, and I better put that puppy somewhere under my pillow or somewhere else, because there was a little game that the other units would try to steal the guidon, the tip from you. And if anybody ever stole that tip from me, I was in big trouble. So I managed to do it. And well, like I say, later on we could talk about how that. The other question was, who has a driver's license? Well, silly me, I assumed everybody had a driver's license, right? So I raised my hand, and there's about 5 guys. So eventually I got a military license, and there's a story there too I could tell you about what happened because of that.
All right. Basically, it's going to sort of follow the story. Did you do a bunch of testing when you got there, or had you taken tests when you were earlier on?
I haven't thought about that. I guess there was some classroom. I do vaguely remember a classroom now that you mention it. I think there was probably some whatever intellectual capacity testing, whatever they call it, to see if 2 and 2 equaled 3 or 4. I don't have much memory of that anymore.
So when you start up, then now what's kind of the daily routine in basic?
Oh, gee, I haven't thought about all this. Wake up bright and early. Now, bright and early didn't bother me, having spent 4 years in military school. And before that, I was a newspaper boy in Pittsburgh, and I was the morning paper boy when we had 2 papers. So me and the dog would get up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock to deliver paper. So I was always used to getting up early. But they would roust you up bright and early. You had a few minutes to get cleaned up. And that was okay too, because in military school they did the same thing. You woke up at, I forget, 5:30, but you had 20 minutes to be dressed, cleaned, and on the blacktop in front of the barracks. So I was used to that too. Of course, the one difference was in the military. I always remember the sergeant came around one morning, or very early on, and he kind of went like this on my face and said, "Aronson, did you shave?" And I'm thinking, shave what? There's nothing to shave. Well, of course, I was a young kid. I had what they used to call peach fuzz. And the little shaving I'd ever done, my father had an electric razor. So I had an electric razor. I might have used it once or twice just for the fun of it. And so they immediately gave me what I called a straight razor, which is not a straight razor, of course, but a Gillette kind of a thing. And I had to learn to shave fairly quickly. I probably lost a few pints of blood doing that, but that was interesting. But no, you would get up, you were inspected to make sure your shoes were shined and all the buttons were buttoned, and all that sort of thing, and then you were marched off to the mess hall, which was just right down the street, but you were promptly marched off to the mess hall. Sometimes before you went to the mess hall, you just went out for a little run for 4 or 5 miles or whatever they decide. I don't know how many miles it was, but it seemed pretty far to me. At the time, it didn't bother me. I was never an athlete. When I was in military school, I played soccer, lacrosse, and fencing. Those are things a young, very small person could do and not get hurt too badly. Even with lacrosse, at least I had a big stick to protect myself. So running wasn't something I looked forward to, but didn't bother me too much. But you might go out for a run, but eventually you went to the mess hall. One of the things that did bother me at the mess hall, that before you were entered the mess hall, everything was about getting you in shape and giving you the right diet and what have you, because a lot of people were not in good shape. You had to go through, what do they call the monkey bars, I think, a set of bars, a long set where you had to swing from one to the other. That was not easy for me. First place, I was pretty short, so somebody behind me had to kind of pick me up to get me up there, just to jump me up. And I still remember, I hadn't thought about this either for a long time, but my hands being literally, after some weeks of this bloody and bruised and whatever, obviously you had to, plus you had to go swing through the monkey bars, and then you had to do pull-ups. This is, I don't know why the Army thinks that the pull-up answers all of the physical problems you ever had, but lots and lots of pull-ups, and that was difficult for me too. The Aronsons, our family, we didn't come from an athletic background, I can tell you. I wasn't the high school football player. So I remember all of that. Otherwise, after you managed to get through all of that, at the time, of course, I think nowadays they have civilians who cook the food, but at the time you had cooks, crazy cooks, and you would pull duty once in a while in the mess hall. But you lined up and ate whatever they gave you, and wasn't much time for that, of course. And then you went out and learned how to shoot, or learned how to march, or learned how to salute, and learned the uniform rules of military justice, which I haven't thought about, and other things, Army traditions, whatever.
All right. Now, how much did that military school background help you beyond what you mentioned already?
I think it probably helped a lot. I think it really did. A sergeant this far from my face screaming at me wasn't anything new, because kids could be kids. You ever read the book 1984? Kids, or not 1984. What was the other one with the kids? I can't remember the book.
Oh yeah, Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. That's exactly what it was. I mean, there were good days and bad days, but it was a little bit of that. You got 500 young, testosterone-full young men, some of whom think they're very important to the world. You had that kind of. There were stories. So, but I was used to the abuse. I mean, even in military school, if my grades weren't good, if I wasn't stating attention properly, we used to march what they call tours, T-O-U-R-S, tours. And so we had a football field in front of our barracks, the military school, and an asphalt driveway, if you will, around it. And we did our Sunday parades. You would march there and march into the field and do all this sort of stuff. But if you were bad in some way, or a teacher thought you did something, you weren't paying attention, you had to march tours after school. So they gave you, and 1 year out there, you had to march around and somebody made sure. So I was used to being punished for being a bad boy. Not that I ever marched a tour, but I heard other people did it. So I think it helped a lot. I really do. I really do.
What kind of mix of people were you training with? Were they all from the same area or different backgrounds?
This is going to be a really interesting experience. All these things I haven't thought of for all these years. No, it was people from everywhere. It was integrated, which again, my heritage is Jewish. I don't practice the religion, but my mother is, which means I am somewhere. And I was brought up as a Jew in the suburban Bethel Park, where there were only 3 Jewish families. Everybody else was white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, or in Pittsburgh, Catholic. Everybody's Catholic. Every third person's Catholic. And I don't know if I ever would experience much prejudice in school, public school, because, but in a military school, to get where you're getting to here, but in military school, I stood out because everybody else marched up to what was called the Old Stone Church. There really was an Old Stone Church. And so on Sunday, they all marched, but all the Jews, or quasi-Jews, or whatever we all got put on a school bus and sent down 10 miles down the road to Stanton, Virginia, where there was a temple, which most of us tried to avoid, but they sent us down there anyway. But that was my exposure. And you'll notice in none of that conversation were the African Americans. In my, of course, I only went through junior high in Bethel, but we had there were 3 gentlemen, and it was all cliche. They played football. What can I say? It was just the times. In military school, as I mentioned, you couldn't be an African American garbage man, much less a student there. So for me, it was interesting. I didn't really care. We weren't raised with any prejudice in our family because we were the persecuted type, so we had to be careful with everybody else. I'm still that way today, I think. But there were people there from all over the country. And you had your New York City slickers who were too smart for their own good, and you had the country boys who, I can tell you in retrospect, turned out to be the best soldiers. And you had the African Americans who, I don't remember anybody special, or I don't remember any special problems. I remember problems in Vietnam, but not in basic training.
Okay. All right. Now, how long does basic training last?
8 weeks.
Okay. And what do they do with you at the end of that?
Well, as you got close to the end of it, and of course I had signed up to be in artillery. A little side story, why artillery? Well, my father was an artillery in World War II. Turned out that he wasn't in the same kind of artillery. He was anti-aircraft. We didn't need that in Vietnam. So I had signed up for artillery. It was one of those things like, if I figured I was going to war, I wanted to see the war. The infantry might have been a little too much war. Little did I realize later that wouldn't have mattered, but at the time it seemed different. I didn't want to be, well, there's a term for what they call the guys in the back, which I won't use, but I didn't want to be in the background. I wanted to at least see what was going on. So, if I remember, I can't remember if they gave us a little leave. I might have got to go home for a few days after basic. I don't remember anymore. But then I had to report to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, which of course I'd never heard of. I'd never been to Oklahoma. And that was 9 months of artillery training.
Around when did you arrive there? Was it late in '68 still?
Oh my, let's see. We have to go backwards. See, September, so you had like 2 months.
Yeah, November.
That's November, so that would have been December of '68. And that was a nine-month course on how to shoot artillery.
All right. How would you describe sort of the facilities at Fort Sill? What were those like?
You know what? I have never been back to Oklahoma since. I had no love for Fort Sill. I actually don't remember really the barracks much anymore. I would say that generally they were like they were at Fort Jackson, old World War II stuff. Fort Sill was either god-awful cold or god-awful hot. It was windy, it was sunny, they had bugs. It was a big base, and I don't remember the facilities themselves. I don't remember too much about them really, except that I do remember going outside of Fort Sill. There's a little god-awful town called Lawton, Oklahoma. That was also, I went off base a few times over the years, over the 9 months. It was a terrible place. It was full of bars, war bars, lots of young ladies dancing for money, taking off their clothes. Things I wasn't exposed to in suburban South Hills, Pittsburgh, I can tell you. Pawn shops, lots of pawn shops, lots of places to buy alcohol, and I haven't been back. It was a strange place.
Okay. Now, did you spend the full 9 months actually training, or is there a point when you're actually doing regular duties on the base before you go to Vietnam?
Well, as far as I can remember, I spent 9 months training.
Okay.
I did something a little different. At some stage of the game, they approached us and said, well, this is not a quote, of course, but they basically said that they needed more sergeants because they were getting too many sergeants killed, and it takes through the normal chain of getting promoted. They didn't have time to promote you. So they set up an NCO school instead of OCS. It was NCO, and they told me, of course, that if I went to NCO school, which I think was 8 weeks or so, that I'd go in as a sergeant. So of course I wouldn't be a private, which obviously it's better than being a private. Little did I realize that later on it really didn't matter too much, but it seemed like a good idea. I get paid more because I would go in as a sergeant, and so forth. So I actually consider I wanted to go airborne school. I wanted to go jump out of airplanes. I thought that'd be fun. But the sergeant thing came up, and so I went to sergeant school. So that's probably the only thing that I did different. But of course, all these things change your life that you don't realize at the time. And so I learned how to shoot artillery. So I tried anyway.
All right. Yeah, what did the actual artillery training consist of? What were you doing? Just
Oh,
shooting guns
well, all I remember now is, I'm sure there's probably some classroom training, which was long forgotten. I just remember, you get in a truck, you have at the time they were split tail 105s. Eventually, when I went to Vietnam, we had the closed tail with a little wheel in the back that the airborne folks used. But you went out into the middle of nowhere, set these things up, and you learned how to set fuses, and learned there were 7 little bags of powder, and learned what bag would get you what range, how to pick up the gun, how to move it around, and everybody had an assigned task. So I was being taught to be the crew chief, the guy in charge. So I had to learn how to do the aiming, which for me actually wasn't that easy because math was never one of my skills in life. And came back to haunt me once when I was in Vietnam. Although I didn't hurt anybody, but I could have. And you had aiming posts. You had to learn how to use these little red and white aiming posts. And there's 6 guns to a battery, and all that sort of things. All these little training things. But I don't know. You just had to learn how to use all the different bits and pieces to be as effective as possible and do it as fast as possible too.
Did you train on guns other than the 105?
I don't remember. There were 155s floating around. We may have went out and looked at them one day or saw somebody else doing them. I don't remember getting any training on them. No, I don't remember.
Okay. And were you using your military driver's license yet, or does that come later?
Yeah, well, actually it came earlier. There's a story, we didn't talk about it, but if I go back a few months to basic training, it was interesting. I was brought up on what used to be called foreign cars. Our first car was a used Packard that my uncle gave my father. But after that, my father started, we didn't have much money. We were up a small house, no attic, no basement, no garage, called Lust-Drawn Home. Look that up sometime, it's very interesting. Little metal house, literally a metal house. Anyway, I was raised on what used to be called foreign cars, which is why I never learned how to work on a car, because I couldn't work on a car. You needed metric tools, and only certain people in Pittsburgh knew how to do it. So I was raised on BMWs before anybody knew what they were, on a Saab. I learned how to drive on a Saab before anybody knew what they were, and there's a long list of them. So anyway, so I learned how to drive on a stick shift, however. So when I raised my hand and they said, okay, you're going to get a military license, at some stage of the game, I forget when, they took me out to driver training, which means a whole bunch of us, we went to the motor pool, they showed us a deuce, what's called a deuce and a half. They threw us in the back, drove us down the road, stopped the car, they stopped the truck, one guy got out and said, okay, you're next. You would get in, sergeant was sitting next to you, and they said, okay, drive this puppy down the road for a quarter mile. Well, they did something called double clutching, which is something I never heard that before. Anyway, so I swear I drove a quarter mile. The guy said, okay, passed, next. And that's how I got my military license. Okay, so now that was beneficial to the degree that while other kids might have been marching sometimes, I got to drive, except for the one time we were going out to the rifle range. And I can still see it. We're driving on the road, there's this long convoy of us, and we're driving down the road and we go to make a left out to wherever the firing range, learn how to shoot our M16s, which, by the way, another little side story, we were the first unit, one of the first units to get M16s. Everybody before us had M14s, so actually we were pretty happy about that because the 14s are pretty heavy. So I still remember, I was myself, 2 sergeants next to me, which turned out to be in my favor. So I'm driving down, we're only going 25 miles an hour, you can't go fast. We go around this corner, make a left, and I swing the truck too fast. I'm used to little TV sports cars, right? So I swing it around too fast, and I get into the sand. Lots of sand down there. So I get into the sand, and I'm looking right where the camera is here. There's like a stop sign or a speeding sign or something, some kind of a street sign. And then when you got your driver's license, they said, if you ever hit anything with this truck, you're going to pay for it. So don't hit anything. Okay, so I'm just a little kid, right? I got the sergeant sitting next to me. I'm scared to death. I better be careful. So I get off the road, so I make a little turn to get back onto the asphalt again, and the tire digs into the sand, and the whole truck slowly rolls completely over 180 degrees, where the tires and stuff are sticking up, and the bottom is, well, on the bottom. with a bunch of mad people in the back. You see a bunch of kids like me who had their rifles on in their packs and whatever. That was a little exciting. And of course, the sergeant next to me grabs the wheel and he says, "Aronson, what are you doing?" Well, that's Saved by Bacon. So we get out, we crawl out. Of course, there's people in the back who are yelling and screaming and whatever. This all happened in real slow motion. The only injury to me, well, I think it was, there's a bruise, there's not even a bruise. The steering wheel hit the top of my right leg. To this day, I have what I believe is some nerve damage there. Every once in a while, my leg will hurt, and I attribute it to that accident. Now, of course, in the military, nobody gave a hoot about that. So immediately, an MP came over, grabbed me, said, "Aronson, go sit on that stump." About 100 yards away, there was an old stump sitting in a field. Go sit on that stump and don't move until somebody comes to talk to you. Well, some kids were hurt. I don't know, to this day, nobody, it's the military, they don't tell you what you need to know. So some people were hurt. I don't know, I heard maybe a few broken arms and some stuff. Nothing really, really bad, but bad enough that when I got back to our barracks, I was eventually told by somebody that, look, you only have 2 weeks left, I think it was. Do not leave this area. Some of those kids that got injured are going to have to stay in basic training until their injuries heal. They might be here for another month or so. They are not happy with you right now. You better stay where you are. And so believe me, I did. Now, of course, I also got to meet a lot of colonels who wanted to know why I crashed their truck. I called home and called my father, who of course is an insurance agent. I figured, well, hey, I have an accident, might as well call an insurance agent, right? So I called my father and said, "Do we have a lawyer? Because I just had an accident with a military vehicle and we might need a lawyer. I might need a lawyer anyway." Well, little did I know that was silly. Eventually, nothing ever happened to me. No Article 15s or anything, because the one or two colonels who interviewed me, of course, I'm sure, in retrospect, 40 years, these old guys look at this young kid, probably going, "Good Lord, what are we doing? Why are we doing this?" Mm-hmm. But they had to do what they had to do. The fact that there were 2 sergeants in the front seat instead of 1, that was a violation of the rules. And the fact that the other guy grabbed the wheel, he really did, I wasn't making it up, he grabbed it. If he would have left it alone, we might not have turned over, I don't know. But those 2 little conversations got me out of it. They basically wanted to see me get the hell out of Dodge and shoot me over to Fort Sill and out of their area. So that gets me back to Fort Sill. Right. So did I drive? Yeah, I don't remember much of it, quite honestly, at this stage of the game. But yeah, did I drive? I drove.
Now, while you were there at Fort Sill, were there other guys cycling through and being packed off to Vietnam or other places while you stayed there?
Oh yeah, sure. There were. When you got further down the training, there were 2 things that I remember. Well, maybe more than 2, but 2 things that might be interesting for this. One, when I went to the NCO school at Fort Sill, I do remember us being in one of these another little Army World War II barracks kind of place. And I had a bunk mate, bunk beds. There was a kid below me, don't remember his name, can't even see his face anymore. But we were going to go somewhere, training, whatever, and he said, "You want to know if I had any aspirin?" And I actually had a little bottle, because, something you could carry. And I said, here's my aspirin. I figured, you take a few aspirin, whatever. Well, so I went out and did whatever training that I was supposed to do, or lunch, or whatever it was. And I came back, and wherever the kid, he was gone. And I said, "Well, what happened to, Johnny," or whatever his name was? And somebody else said, "Yeah, he swallowed a bottle of aspirin. He didn't want to go to Vietnam." And they hauled him out on a stretcher, because a bottle of aspirin really messes up your body. They told me it would, quote, boil, I remember the guy saying it would boil your blood. I don't know what it really did, but that's what they said, And it was a long time before I realized that was my aspirin. I eventually saw that bottle later and said, oh. Anyway, the other part to get back to your question was that as you got near the end of your training, they gave you what we used to call a dream sheet. Where do you want to go? As soon as you get out of artillery training, well, where do you want to go? Well, shoot, everybody wants to go to Hawaii or someplace, or Germany. So everybody filled in. Well, me being me, what the hell, I put in Vietnam because I knew I was going anyway. And you know what? Everybody went. It didn't matter. You all went. So I remember the dream sheet, and off we went.
Okay. Now, did you stay longer because you had a 3-year enlistment, so they didn't have to rush you off to get the year in, or?
No,
They
no.
just-
The extra schooling was the NCO school.
Okay. But that's still only a couple of extra
Yeah,
months.
a couple extra months. I remember it as 9 months.
Okay. So now once you get orders for Vietnam, do you
Yeah.
go home first on leave?
I think we went home for a week or so. I don't remember now, but
Okay.
I'm sure we went home.
All right. And then where do you fly out of?
Oh my!
You go to San Francisco or Seattle or?
I came back through Fort Washington as we get toward the end of the story.
Yeah.
So I think I probably went out of San Francisco or someplace like that.
Mhm.
I do remember. You know what? We probably did, because I do remember on the way over we stopped in Hawaii. They said for fuel.
Mhm.
I remember they let us off the plane in a little penned-in area, so nobody would want to go to the beach. And then we were on and off for an hour or two maybe, and we got back on again, and off we went.
All right. Did you stop anyplace else after that?
Wow, I don't remember stopping. I don't remember if they stopped in Japan to fuel or not. I don't remember anymore.
Might have been. Okay, but anyway.
I do remember landing, whichever air base it was now. I remember Tansanut, probably. Looking out, it was night. I remember when we landed, it was night. It was night, it was dark, everybody was nervous, of course. Everybody's looking out the window like, the bad guys are going to be right outside the door, and you better duck or something. I remember this, I guess we probably all had duffel bags, I don't remember that anymore, but they put us all on buses, kind of like school buses, and the buses had wire cages on the windows. I wasn't sure if I was a prisoner or or what it was. Of course, later you realize, in case somebody tried to throw a hand grenade through the window, it wouldn't have gone through, it would have bounced off. And they bussed us to whatever the little base was in the little area of the base where all the incoming people got bussed.
Okay.
And we were all nervous about it.
And then, but there wasn't anything otherwise going on. There was no incoming fire or anything like that.
Not that I remember. You hear noise, but we were all hypersensitive.
And when did you
I could have heard a cricket croak at that stage of the game.
So when did you actually arrive in Vietnam?
Oh, I don't remember the date anymore. Some of my records might have it. It was
Fall of
I'd have
60,
to look at my
sort of
DD.
fall of '69 by then. As if you.
Yeah, so you're 60. Yeah, it's a year later, so it's
Yeah.
it had to be September of '69.
Mhm. Okay. So they land there. You get sorted out, processed. So you didn't know what unit you were going to join yet.
No, I'll tell you a little story about that too. So they put you off the bus. They make sure you are who you are, and assign you a bunk, and give you some equipment, and there you are. And then they're waiting for a unit that needs a body. Doesn't sound nice now, but it's probably what it was. Anyway, in the meantime, they need to keep you busy. It's the Army. Hurry up and wait. So I can tell you two stories that stand out. I can't remember exactly which one happened first. It doesn't matter anymore. So, but and let me make 2.5 stories. So they have old soldiers, lots of stories. And it's your fault. You're bringing all this stuff up again. So
Tape is cheap.
they need to keep you busy. So one day they sent us out to pick up old barbed wire, which in retrospect seems silly, but it was just to keep you busy. So here I am, a newly minted 3-striper sergeant, and so I get to sit in the front of the truck, and there's some private young man that could have been me, right? So he gets to drive, and there was a lieutenant, so it's like, me, and I'm the sergeant. Lieutenant gets the shotgun, gets the door, and some other volunteers, so to speak, Army-type volunteers in the back, and we all drive out to someplace, and it's just, to police the area, to pick up. Now, policing the area wasn't that foreign to me to the degree that, in military school we kept the grounds clean. I would tell you something we didn't do, but it would, in basic training, it was a huge, I can't explain to you how big a shock it was for me to have to spend free time in basic training picking up cigarette butts. We did not smoke. Our family didn't smoke. The fact that I had to pick up somebody else's little dirty cigarette butt was, I'm not hyper, sensitive to cleanliness or anything, but it was just, really? I mean, this is a job. I mean, I just couldn't. And then, of course, in basic, you would stop somewhere and they would say, light them up if you have them, or smoke if you have them. And I go, wait a minute, these kids are all smoking and throwing their butts back on the ground I just picked up a few minutes ago. But anyway, so policing up areas with all the military training, military school training, policing the area was not something foreign to me. So we all get out of the truck, and there's a bunch of old rusty barbed wire. And for whatever reason for the Army, we had to pick it up and throw it in the truck. So we all just go over and start picking this stuff to throw in the truck. Well, it didn't take too long before the lieutenant, goes, Aronson, I'm thinking, oh God, what did I do? What could I possibly have done? So he calls me over. You can tell he's not a happy puppy. And he says, what are you doing? I can still see this. He says, what are you doing? Well, we're picking up barbed wire. We were told to pick up barbed wire. I says, no. He said, let me ask you a question. He said, what's on your shoulder here? I said, well, I've got 3 stripes. I'm a sergeant. And what are those guys? I said, well, they're privates. And he said, well, would you like to be a private? No, so I like being a sergeant. It's okay. He said, well, here's the deal. You're in charge of that. There's 3 people, whatever it was, picking up the barbed wire. He said, now, your job is to stand over there and watch them pick up the barbed wire and make sure they do their job right. If you want to go help them pick up the barbed wire, I'll rip your stripes off right now, and you can go do that if you want. I'm not going to give your stripes back to you. Yes, sir. that took care of that. That was one little Army lesson. And I've never been, by the way, very good. I've never been the kind of boss, which I am, the boss here some days. I grew up in, we all just help each other work. And I was never the leader of anything because I didn't know how to be the leader. I was just a worker bee. I'm still a worker bee, at least in my opinion anyway. Another story I remember is driving somewhere from wherever base we landed, Tunson probably, and driving somewhere for a reason which I've long forgotten. We'll out of the base, driving on Route 1, I guess it probably was Route 1, and to get this not bad road actually, and a wide expanse, and of course Vietnamese folks and all kinds of walking and all kinds of different vehicles and whatever. And so we're driving down the road. There's a few things I noticed. First, there's these clouds of black smoke puffing up all over the place. And I poked somebody in the ribs and go, what is that? And he said, well, you're going to learn about that because that's going to be your job eventually. He said, you're burning human waste. Because when you went to the little outhouse thing, they had a half of a 55-gallon drum, which you would pull out in the morning, pour diesel fuel in, and light that puppy on fire. I could still smell it. All these years, I could still smell it. But at the time, what did I know? The other thing was, and I don't know, I'll say this, there's no polite way to say it. I'm driving down the road, and there's some, Vietnamese gentleman, and I saw this more than once, and all of a sudden, he just has to go to the bathroom. He just stops right there, and either squats or what, and goes to the bathroom in front of like 10,000 of his closest friends. That was a little different to a white Anglo-Saxon middle-class boy from Bethel Park. What did I know? So those are 2 things. There's another story like that we could talk about later, but those were 2 of my early memories of waiting to go into the country.
About how long did you spend around the base before you got assigned?
I think it was about a week.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly, but about a week.
And then what unit did they assign you to?
1st Infantry Division, Big Red 1.
Okay.
Big Red 1.
And where were they operating at the time?
Oh my. The only, we of course we moved around in trucks. It wasn't like later when I was the 101st. I was so new and so innocent, and I really didn't know. You didn't get talked to, you got told to. So it was like, we'll go in here, we'll go in here. I was at a number of little fire bases. The one that I do remember is a place called Xi'an, Xian, which, by the way, in China is pronounced Xi'an, because I've been there too. Long story. But I remember Xi'an, and there's again, usual amount of interesting stories, some of which aren't that good. But so we got moved around. I was looking last night, I think I sent a lot of my, about 10 years ago, I sent a lot of my Vietnam things and my old military school stuff back to the military school in Virginia because they actually have a legitimate museum recognized by the state of Virginia. A bunch of kids like me contributed a bunch of money to put this thing together. So I used to have a little piece of paper I carried around for years, a little spiral-bound book, and every time we went to a new fire base, I would write that fire base there. and I had a list. It was, I think after by tour, it was like 13 or 15 different fire bases through 3 different units that I was with. So I just remember, Zion in general, and I do remember one fire base in particular that I was at.
Okay. Well, Zion, that was sort of a main base for the 1st Division at a certain point.
It probably was. I don't know. I just wasn't inquisitive enough. I was just told where to go and what to do.
Okay. Now, and then were you assigned to an artillery battery?
I was in artillery battle. I do not remember the numbers anymore.
And then did you go in as a crew chief, or did
I went in as a crew chief. Indeed, I did. Yes.
Okay. And do you remember what kind of reception you got when you arrived at the unit? How anyone treated you, or how you adjusted?
Not at the not at the 1st Infantry. I was just the new guy. There's a term for that too, but FNG, which stands for something. But yeah, I don't remember anything special. I really don't. No, sorry.
Okay. And and then how much activity was there? Were you firing a lot?
It was off and on. Even when we got to the meat of this conversation, maybe with the 101st and Ripcord, the war is like that. War is not continuous. It happens when you least expect it sometimes, not when you plan for it, and it's off and on. There were days when in fact, I'll tell you one interesting story. There were days when we did pretty much nothing. I still remember, I only remember one fire base, I really do, in the 1st Infantry. It was, I remember, on a flat field out in the middle of nowhere. Of course, I thought I was in the war. Later on, when I went to the 101st, I really was in the war. We were in a circle. Our bunkers are kind of on the outer edge. The artillery pieces were in the middle. We get fire missions once in a while. The lieutenant yells out a fire mission, or captain, whoever it was. Everybody runs out to their guns and turns them in a certain direction and shoot a few rounds this way or a few rounds that way. I just remember 3 or 4 stories maybe from that time, or 5. I can picture the fire base in the circle and all that. I remember we did have one case once where I guess the statute of limitations is up now, so I can talk about it. For the friendly fire, I probably precipitated friendly fire once. The good news was I didn't kill anyone. Frequently on fire missions, when somebody called a fire mission in, the first thing you would do is shoot out some smoke rounds so that the gentleman out in the field who was directing all of this would make sure that you had the right coordinates and so forth. And one day we shot out some rounds, and all of a sudden the lieutenant or whoever it was came out and screaming, going, "Stop, stop, stop, everybody stop." So right in the middle of what you were doing, like, okay. He said, "Everybody get away from your guns." And he said, we had a friendly fire incident. And I'm thinking to myself, this could have been me. Was really good with math and numbers and azimuth and all that kind of stuff. And so I looked at my aiming piece, and I'm thinking, I don't think this is where it's supposed to be. So I did a quick whip with my wrist on the knob, and then I ran over to where I was supposed to run over. And of course the lieutenant then had to go around and look at everybody's aiming piece to make sure that you had the right azimuth on it. Got a few degrees, you could kill somebody. I didn't get taken to the woodshed on that. They couldn't figure out what happened. I'm pretty sure in retrospect it was me. The other thing I remember about that base was it was hot, of course. It was flat, so either you're hot or you're wet in Vietnam. Either hot or you're wet. Sometimes you're actually cold, but mostly hot and wet. When there were thunderstorms, or rainstorms, I guess I should say, you could see them miles and miles off. But most of the time when I was down there, I was hot. We would sleep at night in sleeping bags, but even though it was god-awful hot, you would still zip up your sleeping bag. Why? Because you had rats, lots of rats. And the rats like to bite the tip of your nose and the tip of your ears and your belly, top of your belly, because that's where it's warmest, where the blood flows. And so I would be sleeping, and you would hear a thump, 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 and you'd go whap like this, and it would squeal, and you hear it thump against the wall. The rats didn't scare me. As rats, I don't like spiders, but rats don't bother me. But you don't want to be bit by one because you could get some kind of disease. The other thing we did in our spare time was we would have tarantula fights. Now, spiders I don't like. Nevertheless, somehow they didn't bother me there. Not that I would pick one up necessarily, but they would live in the ground. And so you take a little bit of diesel fuel and pour it in the hole, which would make them mad. And so they would climb out, and then somebody braver than me would capture them. And then you'd have either tarantula races where you put them in a bucket and watch them fight each other. This is the American taxpayer's dollar at work. But I remember those. And the last story I think I can remember from that period of time, I'm proud of this one. One day it was hot and quiet, and everybody's bored, and the officers have to keep you occupied. You don't want thinking too much when you're in the Army. And so, out in the distance, probably 200 or 300 yards away, on this flat area outside of our little boundary there was a tree that was worse for the wear, because the area had been bombed over the years, whatever. But it was still a pretty good looking tree. And the lieutenant comes around and says, "Here's the deal. I'll give a case of beer to the section that can blow that tree up. But you can only do it this way. You couldn't use the aiming piece. It was what the Kentucky windage. So you turn the gun, and you have, of course, I mentioned before, 105 has 7 bags of powder in the thing. So nobody's going to tell you how much powder. You had to figure out how much powder, how high the tube's going to be, and you get one shot. And whoever gets closest to that tree gets that case of beer. I'll have to tell you that our gun, aimed by yours truly, hit that damn thing dead on. We were the only gun to hit that tree. Right smack square, blew the smithereens, and we got the case of beer. That was I saved the United States from commies by shooting down that tree.
Okay. Now, while you were on these fire bases, did they ever get mortared or probed by the enemy?
With the with the 1st Infantry, I don't remember any of that. Okay. I really don't. We were, to me anyway, of course, I didn't know. I was just a lowly sergeant. I'm sure that people knew things, but I just have no recollection of having any bad times with 101st. It was mostly waiting for fire missions and being too hot.
Okay. Now, were you in areas that had a lot of civilians in them?
Yeah, we would see civilians. We would see what I used to get. We could get off the fire base once in a while. One of the things I remember, since you bring it up, is getting a haircut from a little Vietnamese barber shop. Actually, some of the best haircuts I ever had in my life. They had little hand, of course, no electricity. Mm-hmm. They had little hand clippers. They would clip. They would also give you a massage, which were really good. If you wanted to buy drugs, you could buy drugs still, which I didn't, of course, but other people did. So yeah, we were off base. You could get beer and that sort of thing.
Well, did some of them also rent women? And were there prostitutes?
Yeah, you know what? I can tell you one sad story about that. I have one memory of that, which didn't involve me, thank you very much, but it involved a lot of other people. We were driving, I could still see the field. There was this big open field, and at one end of it there was like if you will, a forest, woods, whatever, jungle, I guess. And we were stopped, somehow, for whatever reason we stopped, and a bunch of guys kind of ran over to that thing. And I'm just kind of hanging out waiting for whatever we're supposed to do next. And eventually somebody came around and said, would you like the company of a young lady? It probably wasn't exactly how it was stated, but I'm trying to be polite here for the public. And I just had no urge. I was probably too shy, not very knowledgeable of young ladies, having spent 4 years in military school where there weren't any young ladies, thank you very much. And there was the part of me like, I don't want to be where a lot of other people have been. I might pick up something, because they did warn you, of course, in basic training, and when you landed in country, you got a little speech about, things which would cause various body parts to fall off and never to reappear again. And I did remember those things. I said, no, I don't think so. So that's the only, I'm sure there are things which happened which I don't know. That's the only memory I have the whole time I was in country, really, because I was never in the cities. I wasn't in Saigon and places where you could go to bars. But I'm sure it happened around me, but I was probably too innocent to know about it.
Do you remember anything about how you spent the sort of holiday season in 1969? I mean, because sometimes they would do things for Christmas or whatever.
Well, I do remember they would. I don't have a very specific, but generally I remember that on holidays They would ferry in hot food for you, whether it was helicopters later or on a truck with the 1st Infantry. I do remember as an artillery guy that on New Year's especially, and I can tell you, when we get to 101st, I can tell you some other stories, but that we would all crank up our 105s as high as we could, and we'd shoot up there. We had rounds that were flares, and everybody would shoot up the flares, and the infantry guys would shoot all their little flares and guns. It looked like the 4th of July. It was kind of interesting. The bad guys probably thought we were nuts. But for a short period of time on New Year's, you would get yourself some Chinese rice or Japanese rice wine or whiskey that they had floating around, or some beer. Again, the 101st was, I did a few stupid things, but that's the part that I remember, beyond wishing you were home, what everybody does.
Okay, so how does your stay with the 1st Infantry Division come to an end?
Came to an end because, if I remember correctly, Richard Nixon was starting to send people home. The war was over. Funny, nobody told us, but he was starting to reduce the what we call drawdown, I guess the expression is, to draw down the number of the troops. And so somebody came around one day and said, Aronson, 101st is going home. It's like an old joke,
First is going home.
I'm sorry, the 1st is going, I apologize. The 1st is going home, but you're not. Really, why not? Well, I think you had to be in country for 6 months. At the time, I was only there for 4 months. And it's not like I had a choice, And I said, well, okay. What happens next? He said, well, we're going to put you in another unit, and you're going to the 101st. Well, didn't really mean too much to me. I've heard of the Screaming Eagles, but it was just another division, and they said you're going up north, and that didn't mean too much either to me. I was good in geography in high school, but it didn't mean that much. And that was that. They said you're going, so I went.
And how did they get you up there?
Oh, probably in the back of a really noisy C-130. I remember a number of trips on C-130s over the years. It was not designed for comfort, thank you very much. They launched you out of the air base, flew you as high as they could to avoid the ground fire, and you came down at a sharp angle and landed and got out lickety-split. And from there, of course, they processed you a little bit, and then they sent you out into your unit, out of the country via helicopter.
Okay. Now, when you joined either or both of the 1st Division and the 101st, did you have to go through some kind of school they had for how to serve in our unit?
I don't remember a school for the 101st. I'd been in country at that time for 4 months. I knew what a sea ration was, and I had all the proper clothing. I would expect that I probably had turned in my M16, got a new one from the other division or something like that. You got new patches for your clothes. But there might have been some conversations about the history of the 101st or that sort of thing. I don't remember any of that anymore.
But nothing to acclimate you to the Vietnam and practice patrols and that kind of stuff. The infantry got that.
Yeah, the infantry got that. No, I don't remember any of that. I do remember, which is kind of the next part of the story, I don't remember actually getting in the helicopter. I remember getting out of the helicopter. I remember they said, okay, you're going to go to whatever artillery unit. I was never good with the numbers and all that stuff. But you're going to be with that, or you'll be in charge of a gun somewhere. I said, okay, whatever. So, some subjects of the game said, get on this helicopter, get your junk, and get out of here. So they throw you on a helicopter with a few other guys, fly out in the middle of nowhere, and this was very different than being in the 1st Infantry, I can tell you. I had not been in helicopters really, and I wasn't afraid to fly, but it was just different. So I landed sort of late in the afternoon, if I remember, because I remember it got dark fairly quickly. And we landed somewhere, I don't know which fire base it was now.
Was it kind of hill country or flat?
Yeah, no, I was in the hills now.
Okay.
All of a sudden this was hills. This was not the 1st Infantry. I was out in the country somewhere. The rear base was Camp Evans. I'm sure that's probably where I flew out of in retrospect, but didn't mean too much to me. A place called Fubai, you may have heard the name before. You can really tell if somebody's in Vietnam if they knew what Fubai was, believe me. But no, they flew me out to wherever my unit was at the time. I don't remember the fire base right now. I really wish I could find that list. I'm sure if I looked in one of these books, there might be some of that. There's Bastogne and all these different fire bases, some of the names that I've forgotten. But I just remember landing, jumping out of the helicopter taking off, and looking at this, frankly, this kind of god-awful place compared to where I was, and thinking, well, this must be what the war is, because this looks a lot different than where I was.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a story which I feel bad about to this day, but I was young and whatever. You know, part of your responsibility as a crew chief was to keep the gun in working order, so you keep it clean. So, of course, with the 1st Infantry Division, it was well painted, it was shined, it was oiled, it was in the proper order, it was aimed in the right direction, and so forth. The gun with the 101st looked like it came out of a salvage yard somewhere. And as a still relatively newly minted sergeant, I remember going into whatever little hooch these guys were all living in and making a comment at some stage of the game, I forget when, about the condition of the gun. That got me a lot of cold stares, I can tell you. It was like, son, shut up. It's our gun. It's as clean as it's ever going to be. And if you don't like it, too bad. Otherwise, that's your bunk over there. Get over there, crawl over there, and be quiet. And we will teach you how to fight a war. Because what you've been doing, you haven't seen the war yet. And of course, they were right. So I do remember that part of it.
Okay. And did you kind of adjust and get along with these guys? Or?
Well, yeah, you do. You do. There's always the problem of replacing the last guy who was in charge of the gun. I don't remember really any stories about it. It's the Army. One of the things about when I went to Vietnam, and probably I would imagine if you went there in '62, everybody went over on a boat. They all came off on their same landing craft.
Mm-hmm.
They all stayed together. They stayed there for a year, and they all went home. And the Marines did the same thing. The units all stayed together. There were good reasons to do that, and bad reasons too. And of course, when I went over, it's one person at a time or two people at a time. And so I was told early on, don't make friends, because if you make friends with somebody, they could be dead tomorrow, and it's going to mess up your head, and you won't be an effective fighting machine if you're thinking about your poor dead friend. And so I didn't. I didn't make any close friends. I just did what I was supposed to do.
Okay.
Sure.
This tape is about up, so we're... All right. So we got into your story at the point. You joined the battery in 101st Airborne Division, specifically I think it's B Battery, 319th Field
Yes.
Artillery,
Yes.
105 millimeter guns.
Yes.
Okay. Got them into, you talked about you kind of gotten acquainted and learned to kind of work with the crew and that
Yes.
kind of thing. Okay. Now, do you have a sense of sort of how long you stayed in the hill country? Did you move back to Camp Evans for a while, or?
No, I really don't after all
Okay.
these years. We were mostly out in the hill country, as you call it. Once in the blue moon, we probably went back for certain events or reasons. I just don't remember.
But you don't remember being based in the lowlands for a while, a Firebase Jack or one of those places, or?
Jack rings a bell, but I don't think I was at Jack.
Okay.
I don't think I was there. No, my lowlands experience came, well, as you call lowlands, because when I went to, as we get to the next step, to the 25th Infantry Division, when I was shooting 8 inches 175s, that was all north of Fubai. That was up by the Z. So that was my, if you will, my lowlands
Right.
experience, driving those vehicles and shooting out of Camp Carroll and places
Okay.
like that.
All right. So you got to back up because you're with the 101st. Now, was it busier with the 101st?
It was busier at 101st. We weren't in Oklahoma anymore, Dorothy. The way we shot, even the way we shot artillery pieces with the 1st Infantry, you had time. You had more people on the crew. You had time to do it. It wasn't exactly how you did it at Fort Sill, but it wasn't two guys in the mud in the pouring rain either. So it was. There seemed to be more. There was more tension, if you will, in the air. We didn't have that much free time. There was always something going on. There were helicopters flying, somebody landing, somebody taking off. You were eating dinner, you were moving ammo, you were cleaning the gun, you were talking to somebody. There was just always something going on. It was just busier, it was dirtier, it was hot, windy, sometimes cold. It was foggy, because when you get rain and stuff, it was a different world, it really was.
So think in that area, the monsoon sort of sets in very late in the year and goes on into the spring, or at least that's so you might, if you're in the hills, you might get a lot of rain and a lot of fog. But did it all kind of run together for you?
It really did. You had the dry season, the wet season, but really after all these years, Ripcord was so overwhelmed anything else I did up there that a lot of the other. I'm sure that we moved around. You probably from talking to other folks know the other bases that we were at before we got to Ripcord. I would have to look it up somewhere. I don't remember the other bases. So, like I say, Bastogne rings a bell.
Yeah.
Some of these other bases that are listed in the books will ring a bell to me. But Ripcord erased the memory, really.
Now, before you got into Ripcord, was your battery under strength? Did you have fewer artillerists, or did you have...
I think we were always short of people. I think we always had the right number of guns, but we didn't have, there weren't 6 little soldiers standing in a line, one guy to do the fuse and one guy to pull the powder and one guy to do this. No, this was a group participation event.
So normally how many would you have in your crew?
Boy, normally I don't remember, but I could tell you that if we had a comfortable process going, we probably had 4 of us. I would say that 4 of us, and when push came to shove, and which did many times, there was just 2 of us. Well, you had to do what you had to do. So I would do one side. One guy would. I was still the sergeant, so I still had to. I was still the crew chief, so I had to do the aiming part because I had the training to do that. And I would either, jump over or roll under the gun, whatever it was. The other guy was taking care of pulling the powders and putting the rounds together and handing it over, or he might jam it in. I would jam it in, and I would roll out, and he'd pull the lanyard, or you just did what you had to do. You had to set the fuse, all that sort of stuff. It's kind of like watching NASCAR, I suppose. I'm not a big NASCAR person, but a race car where the car stops, everybody runs to the car, and 3 seconds later, it's gone. Like, what happened? You develop a quasi-well-oiled machine. The difference is that sometimes people are sick, sometimes people are hurt, sometimes people were, frankly, sometimes they were on drugs or alcohol and weren't available to you. They had gone home on leave, they gone on R&R, new guys came in who got to be trained. There was a constant churn of people and process around you. Kept you busy.
Yeah, how much of an issue was there with drugs or stuff like that when you're out in these fire bases? Did it really affect the performance of the unit very much? Or?
Ultimately, to be fair, I have to say that it probably did not. Somehow, people just, no matter what people own up. When push comes to shove, they really do. You had 2 groups. I don't know how to say this politely. You had the drinkers and the druggies.
Yeah.
And so you had the drinkers who were drinking themselves silly because they wanted to be home, and especially when we were out with the 101st. When I was with the 1st Infantry Division, you could buy, I guess it was heroin probably. They used to sell what's called a cap. It was a little, I could still see them. I wish I sure one of them was a souvenir without the drug, of course. But you would find them laying around where people, and the Vietnamese kids would sell them to you for, I forget what they sold them to you for, a little bit of money. But it was a little plastic thing about this big, and it had whatever the drug was. I don't know if it was cocaine or heroin or something. And I saw a lot of those with the 1st Infantry because you were closer to the cities or villages where the kids could come up to the fence and sell them to you. You could throw them money, they could throw you. The 101st were out in the middle of nowhere. The best you could do was pay a helicopter pilot some money to bring you up some cheap Chinese rice whiskey or Japanese rice wine or something like that. But somehow the drugs and the alcohol made it to the bush. I was raised on good French wine, actually. It's a long story. I didn't have a beer until I was in the Army. I didn't have one beer until I actually went into the Army. I almost didn't know what beer was. But part of my mission as the crew chief was to keep the gun operational. So you had to keep the people who were drinking awake and active, if you will, and you had to keep the happy dopers, whatever, happy, and you had to keep both of them from fighting with each other. They had a tendency of not liking each other. They had different mindsets, different intellectual capacities, perhaps. But really, when push came to shove, if there was a fire mission and you needed somebody, everybody showed up. At least that's my opinion. I can't remember anybody who said, you know, I'm going to smoke this joint, you go shoot the fire mission yourself.
Now, when you got the fire missions, how much of an understanding did you have of what you were doing or why you were doing it?
My personal understanding was little, very little. I was not in the fire. You know, the lieutenants who took care of this, they were trained in OCS how to aim the guns and do what they did. No, I had very little. I was told we're going to shoot, you know, 13 rounds that way, and this is the azimuth, and you need 3 bags of powder, and we're going to shoot, you know, 10 Willie Pete's, and first we're going to shoot a smoke round, and that sort of thing. So
Okay.
no, I just did what I was told. I was just a mechanic. I did what I was told to do.
Now, at a certain point, your battery gets actually put up on top of a fire base that is called Ripcord.
Yes.
And was that different from your other assignments?
Well, the first thing that was different, well, of course, let me start at the beginning. I forget where we were. I'm sure one of your other interviewees knows, but I just know that we were told, you know, we're going to this new fire base. Okay, whatever, it's the Army, you go where you're told to go. I remember getting on a helicopter because I was the crew chief and we had to set up the guns. And so we were on, I don't know if it was Captain Rich at the time, some officer, or somebody was in charge, and on a slick, on a Huey. And they flew us up to, you know, just some mountain, what did I know? And I just remember jumping off of that one too. And I think we immediately got some mortar rounds in. That got my attention fairly quickly. Not that I hadn't seen a few mortars before, but really the other fire bases that we were at, we did a lot of shooting out. We didn't really get that much shooting in. There wasn't that much. But these people, when we landed on this hill, these people were, you know, a little excited. And I learned later, of course, and if you read, you know, so I think that they originally ended there around March 13th or something like that, and I think I landed about April 18th. So well, that could be off a little bit.
Yeah.
It's been
Well,
a
they
long
actually,
time.
they tried 3 times to set up, and
Did
the
they?
successful try was April 11th.
April 11th? Okay.
So,
Well,
yeah,
I was
so-
there shortly thereafter. I don't remember the exact date. And, you know, so we were there, and everybody was a little wound up, and I don't remember specifically being shot at, but it was noisy and dirty and windy and smoky and whatever, and the officer that we went with said, you know, the guns are going to go here, here, and here, and back at the other end, you know, the Chinooks were coming in to have them hooked up, and I had to make sure that my gun got into the right place and got unhooked, and my men got the ammo squared, and we started to build a bunker, and everything needed to be done.
Okay. What did the Ripcord Firebase look like?
Oh my, you know, all the pictures I have in my head are probably the after pictures, not the before. It was just some hill. Nothing stands out.
Was it bare rock, or was there dirt?
Well, there was a spot there for us to put our guns.
Mhm.
It wasn't the jungle, but it wasn't the way it looks in the pictures now, of course. Some combination thereof. I don't have a big
Okay.
picture in my head about it. I just know that there was a spot, and this is where the guns were going to go. Nothing stands out now. I mean, I can describe to the hill in my vision of it as it eventually became, but it was just a place we were going.
Okay. But so the setting didn't seem that different from the other fire bases you've been on?
Not in my memory. Some other guys might say I'm nuts, but I don't remember anything special. It was another place that we were going to fire because we're supporting the infantry, and so wherever the infantry goes, the artillery is sure to follow.
Okay.
We didn't know anything about the Oshaw Valley and all that stuff. I was just some kid.
Right. Okay. So what does you? So you're on Ripcord, and the battery is there until the middle of July.
Before that, yeah, we're there, all right.
Yeah, and so when you're starting out there, I mean, what was your world like? I mean, you were just where'd you sleep? Where'd you eat? What you
yeah,
did?
Ripcord is an interesting story. It has a life. You know, it has a life. You land on this essentially barren hill, and you have to build an infrastructure. So you put in guns. You start to fill sandbags and more sandbags. I'll probably be buried in a sandbag. And you know, all day long it's helicopters, more helicopters. Eventually, you start to get fire missions, and you're not ready for them. I mean, you haven't built your little hooch yet, or a foxhole, and they're already calling in fire missions. And so you drop everything, and off you go, and you do what you're told to do. And so we had this 6 of us on top of the hill. And they flew in, I don't remember any of these dates, but there was a 155 unit, 100 yards or so, what I would call down the hill. It was off kind of to my right. So you had the 105s here, the 155s here, a flat area where the helicopters could land, and all your command and control, first aid station, and so forth were kind of right in between both of them. Made sense. We built ourselves a hooch. They brought in corrugated half sheets, round, I forget what you call them, things to, you build a hole in the ground, you put those things on top of that, you put a bunch of sandbags. Inside you made the hooch as comfortable as you could. We had an ammo bunker or ammo area. They used to call me, I haven't thought about this long, used to call me Super Sarge because I could carry so much, and I was younger, I was stronger. And I don't know if anybody's ever told you, but the way you carried 105 ammo, first it came in a brown box, 2 rounds in a big brown wooden box with wire straps. So you cut off the straps, hopefully not cut off your fingers. In fact, the only cut I ever got in Vietnam was right here. It's the only wound I ever got for one of those damn straps. Inside there was 2 black tubes. Inside the 2 black tubes is the artillery round, complete with everything you need. And so you cut off the straps. They had 2 metal things. You pull the metal things, you dump them on the ground, which in Fort Sill they would have had a heart attack. But you dump them on the ground, and then somebody else puts them on your shoulder. So what you do is you took one black tube, the end of the tube here, and hang it over your shoulder that way. Another black tube, and you hang it over your shoulder that way. And then they would take more rounds and put them crisscross behind your neck. So you'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 6 or 7. Now I forget what a 105 round weighs, but I can tell you it was more than I weighed when you put all these things. And then you would struggle up the hill or across the hill or wherever you had to go, and then either you would just dump the bloody things off if there was nobody around, but hopefully somebody would lop them off. And I remember that they used to, because I could carry so many of them. I wasn't a weightlifter or anything, but I guess they took a little kid, probably weighed 98 pounds soaking wet, and how could he do this? I don't know. I did because you had to do it. Because I'm an old Boy Scout, you do what you have to do. So I remember transporting a lot of artillery rounds around.
Because they would land them sort of on pallets on a helipad, and you had to get them.
They would land them where it was convenient. The Chinooks would come in, and they had them underneath of them. I don't remember pallets per se. They might have been pallets, but they had these sling
loads,
things, sling loads, and they would gently drop them wherever. They would take off, and you groups had to run over. Everybody from every gun would come over and take their fair share and stack them up in their area.
And would the enemy start shooting at you when you were doing that?
I have before my version of Ripcord really started, since I wasn't there in March, whenever. We were getting, let's see, what's defined shooting? You can get shot at by a rifle or pistol or with a mortar, basically. I don't remember the rifle pistol except for one experience, which we can eventually talk about. Mortars, yeah, we would get mortars in. This is going to seem either strange or, I don't know how to express it, self-serving or something, or wrong to some people, but you can get used to that. You can get used to anything in life if you do. So the fact that we were getting in 82 millimeter mortars, there was an old cliche. As long as you could hear them coming in, you're okay. The one you didn't hear was the one that was going to kill you. And when a mortar lands, of course, when it explodes, it goes up in a V shape like an ice cream cone. So you could be fairly close to it and not get hit. Kind of luck of the Irish. I'm not a religious person, so kind of luck of the Irish kind of a thing. So were we getting mortars in once in a while? Yeah, it's not like we sat there and kept track of it. And everything didn't come to a screeching halt. But, I wasn't command and control. I was just a grunt. And I was just doing what I was told. So the fact that when the Chinook would show up to drop these things off, were we getting some mortars into this? We might have been. You know what? I wasn't paying much attention to it. You have this thing blowing wind and sand and dust and stuff all over you. It's loud. You're screaming at each other. You're running around trying to do. And were you getting shot at? You wouldn't have even noticed if you were getting shot at. You were so busy, unless it really hit right where you were.
Now, did things intensify over time? Did it get worse as time went on?
Yeah, things. Well, you know what? Let me say no. Let me say that it was a steady drone. You woke up first you work nights or you work during the day, but you're always working. Every night we had almost every night, you had sort of a free fire that at 2 or 3 or 4 in the morning when the bad guys might be coming up the hill because they thought you were sleeping, you lowered your gun down. We have something called a beehive round. They had little flechettes. I used to have one. I don't have one anymore, but about this big. And it had zillions of them, and I forget how many, but zillions of them in one round. You lowered that puppy down, and it blew up right outside right as soon as it left the gun. It blew up right there, and the flechettes went out that way. And plus, then the infantry kids would open up with machine guns or what do you call them? M79 rocket launchers and so forth. And so we had those free fire zones once in a while. There was always some air thing going around. The infantry around us was getting hit, so there would be 4 thuds coming. Not too many B-52s. In fact, only later in the game did I see a B-52 strike. But a lot of jets, a lot of helicopters, Cobras, that sort of thing. There was a steady drone, and some days, it's like the Army. Some days, even the North Vietnamese, I think, will hurry up and wait. So some days they were probably just building their supplies up, and it was quiet. And then some days it seemed like there was more mortars than you would like to have that day. But yeah, it was just a steady drone until July 1st.
Okay. And what happens July 1st?
July 1st, I'm sleeping. Well, July 1st, I'm sleeping in our little hooch, and like I say, you get used to these things. It's like the neighborhood I live in. It's a bad neighborhood. It's a long story, but it's a bad neighborhood. So sometimes I hear people shooting people at night. I hear police. I hear fire trucks. I hear whatever I hear. Yeah, you kind of get used to it a little bit anyway. So the fact that there's rounds going off, you're so exhausted, you're so tired that unless it lands really right next to you, you don't hear it. So somebody woke me up early in the morning and said, we'll get incoming, and the lieutenant or somebody was out there saying, get your guns, get your guns. Well, that's not a natural thing for you to do. When you look out the hooch and you see things blowing up, and some guy says, go to your gun, it's like, can I go back to bed? I really don't want to do this today. This doesn't seem right. I'm protected here, I think, anyway. So I run out to my gun, and I will tell you that later, my crew told me that, and this sounds like a war story, but it is what it is. They told me that every time I took a step, as I was running out to the gun, that I was followed by a mortar round. They said if I ever would have stopped to scratch my nose, I wouldn't be here today. And of course, I never heard it. I never saw them. There was so much going on. Everybody was running. Everybody was yelling. And so the idea is, of course, to have counterfire as fast as possible, to shoot back at the bad guys as fast as possible. And we were getting in just one heck of a lot of rounds. That was just very unusual. Something was up. Something smelled bad. And that's when the battle really, with all due respect to my infantry buddies, that's when the battle really started.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of Mark's sort of beginning, the more steady bombardment, beginning sort of what's essentially a siege of Ripcord. Now, in the meantime, I guess the night, the first into the early morning on the 2nd, one of the companies of the battalion that was based there got overrun on a place called Hill 902. Now, when things like that happened, did you learn anything about that? If something really bad happened to one of the line units, or was that just not?
No idea. But we did see, of course, were all this action going on around us. You could see, you could hear things, you could hear shooting, you could see the Cobras coming in, firing their missiles and guns and whatever. Lots of helicopters flying, a lot of UEs flying around. But no, I was just at the grunt level. Nobody was telling us what was going on. It was like, shoot this way, shoot that way, shoot now, shoot quickly. But no, I had no idea.
Now, where's your crew or your battery? Were you taking any casualties over the course of time in those for before the thing blows up? But I mean, were you getting hit or?
I have little memory of that. Okay. I have one story I can tell you, and it was probably it would have been after July 1st, I'm sure, because before that, it just stuff would. I mean, really, I could eat lunch and there'd be mortar rounds landing 20, 30 yards away. Not to sound flippant about it, but you still eat your lunch. It's just what was happening. If they got closer, then you would duck, I have one story, I don't remember the kid's name, but I was the crew chief, and I told this unfortunate young man to go to somewhere else on the base, and do something. I don't remember what I even told him now, and he didn't do it. And instead, he went somewhere else, which I didn't know. He never came back. It's like, okay, where's Jim, whatever his name was. And I don't know, it was hours later. Could have even been the next day, because you're so busy, you keep track of everybody. And he had gone to another underground bunker, and that bunker got hit by a mortar. He got killed. Don't know who he was anymore. I don't remember the name. If he would have done what I told him to do, he might still be around. I don't know. Otherwise, because of where we were, we're kind of on this part of the hill, and the aid station and so forth is sort of between the two artillery. And there was another thing that happened. My gun was moved. So we first moved in, there were 6 guns at the top of the hill. Well, at some stage of the game, we're taking incoming, including sniper fire, from, if you will, that side. I don't know how to explain it to you. From my left side. And so Captain Rich comes over and says, we're going to move your gun. Like, well, okay, he's captain, I have to do what I'm told to do. So we all tug and push, it's a pain in the neck. And we roll the gun down to the end of the helicopter pad. Hard to call it that, but to the flat area. And we start shooting out in that direction, because Rich, of course, is getting information which we don't know. And, shoot here, shoot that. And so we were kind of protecting that flank, I suppose. And so if anything was happening on top of the hill, that removed me from my unit. So even to this day, I have, like I say, I've only been like one reunion, basically. I lost track of all those people. My world was down here from then until the day I got shipped off of that hill. This was my little world right there. And so if people were getting hurt up there, shot or wounded by mortar fire, I have no clue. Because they just would have been taken down over the hill and into the bunker for repair. And the 155 guys, that was a different world. That was 100 yards away.
Okay. What impression did you have of Captain Rich, as battery commander?
A little wiry fellow. Somebody had told me that he had been in country almost since he was born. I think he did like 7 tours or something. He had been wounded a number of times. They couldn't get him out of the country. He was friendly to me. I did see him at the 30th reunion before he died here, I know, recently. Autographed my book, which I sent off to the museum, but talked to him a little bit. He was a character. But at the time, most of what I think I know about him, I learned later. At the time, I'm just a kid, and he's the captain. He was friendly. I was one of his crew chiefs. So it's not like we, drank beer together, or even water together, or even ate together. He was an officer, and I was not. So we talked. There's actually the only movie of me, or even picture of me on the hill might be. There's one movie of Captain Rich standing in my gun. I'm sure it's my gun, shooting off, and I might have my back to the camera, and I might have been shooting a gun. I can't identify myself. But whatever, Captain Rich was Captain Rich, and he was just the officer I had to pay attention to, and I don't have any special. Like I say, my memory, unfortunately, is probably colored with years of what happened after and stories about him. During the battle, I did what he told me to do.
But basically, he seemed to know what he was doing.
Oh yeah. Just people told me he was a character. He was just an interesting fellow.
Okay.
That's all.
All right. Now, of course, one of the things that happens is as the time the bombardment gets more intense, eventually your battery gets destroyed.
Well, so what happens is things do pick up. The only time, I'm sure that the NVA or somebody shot at me eventually, especially I was exposed at this end of the thing here. And I'm sure I probably got shot at and never knew about it because obviously I didn't get hit. Nobody around me got hit. But I do remember one day where we had snipers, or a sniper probably, and I do remember you could see the round, but you could see little sparks coming off the barbed wire. The rounds were hitting, so somebody was shooting at me, and I wasn't too happy about that. And I'm embarrassed to say that I was pretty low to the ground with, flak jacket on, going like, this isn't good. One sniper could stop an army. You can get used to the mortar rounds coming in. You put one sniper across the river there in the Pirates Stadium, you won't get anybody in this building to move. very scary proposition. So I remember shooting at those guys. I don't know, who knows if we got them or not. But things picked up. They came and went. There's a churn, like I say, there's a churn to the whole process. What eventually changed, what eventually happened, was when the NVA, I assume, shot their first 120 millimeter mortar. First one comes in, and it's boom. It's like, okay, that's a little different, because the 82s had a certain noise to them. This was not an 82. The first thing that happened was all the officers go down and order a stand down. Get away from your guns, just like, remember the 1st Infantry Division story? Somebody's shooting in the wrong direction. So they have everybody in the whole area of operations stand down, anybody who could have shot at us, because they assumed that somebody at Gladiator or at Bastogne or one of these other places might have accidentally plunked around into our area, and friendly fire things was a bad idea. In the meantime, of course, Captain Rich grabs me. There's actually a story in the book, I think, about this. But Rich grabs me and says, let's go take a look and see what happened. This guy, he runs into the fire, but else is running away from it, not Rich. So we run down, and there's this big hole in the ground. And, of course, he'd been around for a while. I didn't know. I don't know what and he gets out his knife, big, and we all had knives, and he's digging a hole, and he pulls out this fin like this. I can still see it. Big fin, what was left of that mortar. And he knew, he knew what he was talking about. He said, this is a 120 millimeter. And of course, I didn't. He explained to me what it was.
Fin, they let it a rocket, probably.
Whatever it was.
Rockets.
Well, I say fin, but what was left over from a mortar or a rocket or something, whatever it was. But anyway, he says, this is a 120. This is not good. He said, well, to me, what do I know? Well, it made a huge difference. So of course, he leaves me, and he has to go talk to the officers about what's going on. In the meantime, a few more of these come in. This stopped everybody. The 82s, we still ate breakfast, lunch, dinner, and took a shower under a bucket once in a while. This was the game changer, as people would say now. An 82 could land on top of your little hooch that had the metal corrugated and a bunch of sandbags. Yeah, it would probably wake you up and make you mad. 120 go right through it. There was no stopping these things. You could not stop these things. This was looking death in the eye. It really was. Not to be melodramatic, but it really was. This changed the whole battle. It really did. And they started to come in at a semi-regular basis. A lot of people probably didn't sleep too well after that. At that stage of the game, we knew that things weren't going well. We started to get more, jets coming in, running, dropping bombs and napalm and whatever, and more gun fits. Everything picked up. Obviously the press was on. Of course, we didn't really know it, but the press was on from the other side to start to get rid of us. But beyond that, of course, the fire missions still come in, and you still have to do what you do. And I do remember one of these rounds. We had a guy. Well, again, back to get used to things. You get used to the 82s. We also got gassed. We would get gas rounds that came in. Now, of course, when you were in basic and even at your artillery, they would train you how to put your gas mask on real fast and breathe out and all this. Let me tell you, I had a gas round hit. I swear, it wasn't much further than you are from me right now. And I had a guy standing next to me, and he took a piece of shrapnel in the chin and in his shoulder, had a flak jacket on, and it just knocked it right to the ground. I got nothing, but I did get this gas all over me. And so I put the gas mask on, and for about 15 seconds I took it off. It was terrible, because this stuff just covered me. You couldn't breathe. You just learned to live with it. The CS gas, it was bad, but you learned to live with it. Somebody else got hit. Don't remember who or why, but we saw somebody, and me and another guy grabbed this guy, and we took him into the, I can always remember this, we took them, because I'd never been into, we went down the helicopter pad, made a left, went into the kind of little tunnel hooch thing, and made a little left, and there was a table. That's where the, I wouldn't say surgeon, but the medic, somebody, they were tending to somebody. I'd never been in there before. And I said, what do you want done with this guy? And of course, everybody's shouting and whatever. And they said, well, take him down the hall. They kind of had a hall of sort. So we took him down the hall, and I forget, on a bed or a chair or on the ground or wherever we left him. And as we were walking up the hall, a round came in there. And I assume killed that kid. And now again, that was an eye-opening. That was like, there's nothing that's going to protect us anymore. And they really started to drop more and more of these rounds into us. And everybody was nervous. Even Captain Rich was nervous. It got to be a little crazy. So, that was of course, before the Chinook got shot down.
Yeah.
We were getting nervous. Now, the grand finale, kind of like 4th of July, is the day the Chinook gets shot down. So we are out there in the morning. I don't remember the time of day or anything, but we'll, shooting my gun, and we may have not been shooting the mission at the time. All I remember now is that it's, the Chinook's coming in because the ammo pad is where you are. It's a little bit beyond where you are. So these things came over me all day long. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you get used to it. And it's noisy, but you could still do your job. Well, somebody taps on my shoulder, because I could be right here screaming at you, you wouldn't hear each other. And he taps it, and he goes like this, and I look up, and the Chinook is kind of a little bit beyond me. It's over that way, 10, 15 yards maybe. And I look out, and I can see the door gunner looking out, and flames coming up from both sides of the Chinook. I knew this was not a good thing, and I knew this was bad. And the thing was starting to settle down, and I can only imagine. I knew what was going to happen. It was going to hit the ground, and those blades were spun around both ends. That helicopter would have come off and cut me in half, and that was going to be a bad thing. And I'm embarrassed to say that I took my look and hauled, to the other end of the pad. Later, of course, I learned that it settled. The one guy in the middle was killed. The cargo guy was killed, and some people they tried to save him. I think I eventually met at a reunion one of the drivers, one of the Chinook drivers, and that was it. It landed on our ammo dump. We had thousands of rounds of ammo. I ran to the other end, down to the 155 unit. My little bravery part dropped its doors and went home, I can tell you. I only vaguely remember looking back to where it was. It was just smoke and things exploding. And I had enough education to know that this was not going to be good. And I wasn't the only one, of course. So the 155 unit was down at the end here. Excuse me. So to go backwards, so the 105 is on top of the hill. You had me down here. You had the ammo dump here, and this strip. And at the end of the strip was the 155 at the end of the hill. Mm-hmm. So I ran down to the end of the hill and down through the 155 battery looking for some place to hide because things were exploding. There was shrapnel and junk going all over the place, and everybody was, ducking. And I ran into a hooch, a bunker, whatever, and there was a bunch of us in that hooch. And we spent some time in there as things blew up. Now, to this day, I'm embarrassed because I should have been out there trying to help somebody do something, but I don't know what to say. Can't apologize for what you've done in the past like that. I peed my pants. Never told anybody this, and now everybody who sees this damn thing's going to see that, but you could maybe edit that part out. Never did that before. I remember leaving the bunker one time because we had, down in that area, we used to get water and fuel. Sometimes I thought they put them in the same tanks, in these big black rubber bladders. I think they hold 500 gallons at a time. And they would bring them under a Chinook and drop them down. So that way when the helicopters landed, they need some refuel. But of course you had to get water. Mm-hmm. The water, of course, was terrible because sitting out in the hot sun all day tasted like a Goodyear tire. Mm-hmm. Well, I never tasted a Goodyear tire, but that's probably what it tasted like. Well, this thing had a bunch of fuel in it. In my youthful exuberance and a little bit of fear probably, I ran up to the first officer I could find, who probably thought I was nuts, and grabbed him and said, "We got to drain that bladder. We got to push this over the side of the hill. We got to get rid of this thing because this thing is going to blow up and it's going to incinerate all of us." And they just sort of told me to get lost and get back to wherever I came from, and that took care of that. And by the way, that thing never did blow up. But it looked dangerous to me at the time. So we stayed there, I stayed there, a bunch of people, until things calmed down a little. I would imagine I was in there for, I don't know, probably a few hours. Again, I should have been out trying to do something, I guess, but although in retrospect, what the hell could I have done anyway? The 155 boys were doing what they could do because they had guns. The infantry kids were doing what they could do, and my stuff was all gone anyway. They landed right on top of me. I mean, blew up my hooch. I lost my camera that I bought in Hong Kong, all my pictures. I lost everything. It's a little vague after this. I remember that after things kind of slowed down, then, coming out and walking around a little bit, talking to some people, everybody was talking and worrying. Somebody gave me a helmet, a flak jacket, because that was all lost too, of course, an M16, which I don't know what the hell I was going to do with it, and pretty much told me to stay out of the way because there wasn't anything for me to do. There's just a few stories I can tell you, but of course, I'd been up for I don't know how many hours at that stage of the game, longer than my body wanted to be. And I do remember somebody said, well, go sleep in our bunker here. So they had a pretty big bunker, I remember. And I climbed in there and I slept on top of some 155 rounds, which might seem strange, but when we originally landed, we built our 105 units, and we had those little metal culverts, and we used to line up our stuff in there, our rounds in there. I'd slept in there overnight too before, so it seems strange now to sleep on a bunch of explosive rounds, but the truth is, despite what they told you in Fort Sill, it wasn't going to blow up at a moment's notice. It was going to take something to happen. So anyway, I suffered, in my opinion, my only shell shock experience in the time I was in Vietnam, because I think it was the middle of the night, but it could have been the middle of the day now. And I fell asleep, of course, right away. I was exhausted. And all of a sudden, it's boom! And I remember waking up, and there's boom, and there's another boom. And I remember running out, yelling, incoming, incoming, to anybody that listened to me. And somebody grabbed my arm and said, no, that's us. We're shooting out. They're not shooting in. And that's probably the worst I was at in the whole time. And I was just exhausted, I guess. And I think I went back to sleep, actually, strangely enough, with this 155 shooting over my head.
Did you help out with the 155 battery at all?
No, they had their own crew, and I wouldn't know how to do anything with them anyway. It was a different round. No, it's all different. The only thing you say, I guess, was azimuths where you shoot, but even those little machines were probably a little different too. No, I did not.
Okay.
I was just useless, whatever, at that stage of the game.
And then how long did it take him to get you off the hill?
Well, we left on July 22nd.
Okay.
And they closed the hill down on the 23rd. And I remember, basically somebody came around and said, we're leaving, get your stuff. Like, what stuff? It's all burning over there. UE landed somewhere. Don't remember anymore. I remember kind of, flinging myself on it and hoping the heck we didn't get shot down and get out of Dodge. We got flown back to, I guess it was Evans, and they let us make a phone call. Now, we'll go backwards a little bit. So here I am on Ripcord for a while, and strangely enough, we're getting mail. We've got this big battle going on, and we're getting mail. I start to get well cards. And I'm kind of looking at myself going, which part isn't well, besides maybe my head? And I always remember, there's a lady, if my mother ever sees this, she'll know, Mrs. James, the nicest neighbor you ever wanted. When we were kids, she used to have little tea parties on her porch and stuff. Mrs. James, who I hadn't heard from in a long time, sent me a get well card. And I'm thinking, why would Mrs. James send me, it gives me goosebumps right now, why would Mrs. James send me a get well card? I hope you're feeling better and all this. Well, so when I called, for the people listening to this, if you heard this, when you called from Vietnam at the time, they had something called the Mars system. And it was a shortwave system, which the younger generation doesn't know anything about. And so you had like a little phone booth, if you will, and you had to say over and out, and you had to talk like a radio operator did, which was foreign to a lot of us. and you called from Vietnam to Hawaii, then they jumped that call from Hawaii to California, and then they jumped the call from California, in my case, Pittsburgh. And I wound up talking to my mother at 3 o'clock in the morning, her time, who you can well imagine was really interested to hear from me. Had no idea the phone call was coming in, was crying on the phone, and wanted to know how I was doing. And I was going, well, I've been in this little battle, but otherwise I'm okay. You know, I wasn't wounded. I have this one cut, but otherwise I was okay. And I don't really remember much of the conversation now, but what had happened, during the heat of the battle, somebody reported me as wounded. And I don't have it here today, but I think it's in the museum. But God, the worst dreams, right? My mother's at home one day, and somebody walks up to give her a telegram, a Western Union telegram. Well, you could well imagine she's thinking the worst. So I think she called my father to come home. I mean, she just worked downtown here in Pittsburgh, and home was 10 miles away. And anyway, I don't know the whole story, but and it basically said that I was wounded in the shoulder, and that I was at a hospital ship in the South China Sea, but otherwise I was anticipated not to suffer any long-term injuries, and I would be okay. And I told her, so she told me this story about, aren't you in the shoulder or whatever? And I said, nope, I'm fine as I am anyway. So I'm sure that made her happy. But I finally knew why I was getting all those get well cards. But no, I was back. We went back to camp, I guess Camp Evans, and never to see Ripcord again.
Okay. All right. Now, how much longer then did you stay with the 101st?
Oh, probably not much longer. Right before July 1st, talk about bad timing. I had signed up as a volunteer for the Army. I was an RA, which means I had a 3-year commitment. But the Army was having trouble getting volunteers as the war was wearing on and people were getting shot. So they came up with a program. And they came up with a program that said if you would volunteer for an extra 6 months in Vietnam, they would take 6 months off your obligation. Now, I didn't mind the Army as a concept, and I actually could have been what's called a lifer. I could have been in the Army for 20 years. Would have been, I would have been okay for me. But I could never go back to Fort Sill and shoot artillery the way they taught me. I could never go back to picking up cigarette butts. That's just repugnant to me. So I opted for the early out program. So I signed up for another 6 months, what meant that after 1 year, they would let you go home for a month, and then you would have to come back for 6 more months. And I swear it was not more than 3 or 4 or 5 days after I signed that piece of paper when July 1st occurred, and all hell broke loose. And it's like, hello, what was I doing? So I don't remember how much longer I was with the 101st. I don't think that I was assigned to any other battery. I think at that stage of the game, the show was kind of over. Obviously, our unit was destroyed. People were scattered about. People were injured or killed. And at some stage of the game, I was sent back home for my 30 days.
What was it like to go back home after that year in Vietnam?
You know, a lot of veterans complain about, I don't know, people spitting on them and making bad noises and stuff. I didn't experience any of that. I think it has a lot to do, a whole lot to do with where you grew up, your family history, your family's feelings about military service in general, your family's feelings about the United States of America in general, your ethnicity, your education, just lots of life experience, who your friends are, who your enemies are. I came back to a group of people who were glad to have me back, to the same young ladies who saw me half naked walking around the Federal Building a few hours ago on this tape. I could tell you a funny story when I actually get out of Vietnam eventually, but that's further down the road here. But the only thing I remember coming back for the 30 days was, you know, whatever, hanging out. There's 2 funny stories. Well, no, 2 stories. One was one of my friends who, a young lady who, one of my neighborhood friends, Cindy. Cindy got married while I was on that 30-day leave. She was the first one of, the best of my knowledge, the first one of my friends to get married. And so we all went to her wedding and all that kind of stuff. So, and they're still married after all these years, I think. The other thing that happened was that I got my LCB card. You're not from Pennsylvania. An LCB card is a Liquor Control Board card. I should have brought that. It's a little yellow card that has a picture of me, looking with lots more hair, I can tell you, and it enabled me to purchase alcohol as a young man. So I could go to war, but I couldn't purchase alcohol because it's Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
And this is going to sound stupid, but I almost missed my flight back to Vietnam because I wanted to have that damn card. And it was slow in coming. I forget how you got it then. I still have that LCB card. And I almost missed my, most people watching this tape would go, really? You should have just waited for the card and stayed home.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you know, I had to go back and do my duty. But I got the card and I went back to war.
Okay. And was it hard to go back to Vietnam, or were you just resigned to it?
Well, you know, I'd volunteered. So if you volunteer to do something, shame on you. And I knew that it was only going to be 6 months instead of a year. And I was looking forward to a different gun. I had signed up to do something different. 8 inches and 175s is a whole different, self-propelled artillery pieces. For somebody who's whatever age I was, 19 or 20, to drive around, although I wasn't the driver, but I played with it a few times, or even to be on one of these things, driving down the road, crushing everything in sight. You know, it's a kid's dream. I mean, it was fun when you're not getting shot at anyway. It was fun. So no, I went back because it was my duty to go back, and I knew I was only going to be there for 6 months.
Okay. And then what division did you join when you went back?
Oh, gee, I think it was called the 25th Infantry or 25th Division of some sort.
Yeah.
We were based in the northern part of Vietnam. I don't remember every fire base. I remember there weren't that many fire bases. These are big pieces of equipment. You don't move them around quickly, and really there wasn't that much need, in my opinion, to move around quickly because of the range. The 175 shot 23 miles. The 8 inches, I think, were 10 miles. So you were pretty close to, I mean, the country wasn't that wide. You could pretty much cover an area of operations without too much trouble. I remember being, you know, big and heavy. Most of my time was with the 175s, the real long barrels. I remember, you know, how to load them and all of that stuff. It was a hydraulic system. The gun was a big thing like a tank, and on the back of it was a blade, like a caterpillar blade, and you actually dug backwards into the dirt, because when you shot, the recoil was so bad, it would knock you right off the gun. You had to hold on. People did get knocked off the gun. But the gun would lose position if you didn't dig it in first. And even when you did dig it in, you had to kind of drive it forward and move it around before you shot the next round sometimes. And the powder, if I remember, was about 100 pounds, big. The only picture that I don't know where it is anymore, had of me in Vietnam was sitting in a chair with this big white bag of powder on my arms. I can't tell you why. But you could pick up the powder, but first you had to put the round in. So you had the artillery piece, and that was done with the hydraulics. You had it on the ground, you would roll it around. At one time I could actually pick up a 175 round. It was difficult. 8 inches were really, really heavy. They were short and squat and very heavy. But you put it on a plate, which was a hydraulic system. I could still hear the noise. And you would round up and you would put it at the end of the barrel, and then you had a hydraulic ram, and it would ram it in there, and then you would decide how much powder, and it had a cotton thing. You would tie it off, and you would put the powder in, and then you would slam the breech, and then you put another little, which you would call like a 30-30 blank. I don't know what the caliber was, but a blank into the back of it. And then you crank that puppy up. It was all hydraulic, and everybody would hold their ears if you had time to hold your ears, or get off the gun, and you would shoot it. It went boom, and then you would lower the gun and start it off again. And you couldn't do it very quickly. Of course, you did it as fast as you could, but it was a bear. It was a bear. It was different.
Okay. And were these bases that were kind of away from civilian populations?
These bases were, in my opinion, away from civilian populations. The only, I'm sure I was at probably 2 or 3 bases, but the one that I remember was, I thought it was called J.J. Carroll. Maybe it was just Carroll.
Camp Carroll.
Camp Carroll.
Yeah, that's
Camp Carroll was up on a Z.
Mm-hmm.
Camp Carroll was an interesting place. I remember driving up to it, and with the first day we arrived there, we could see across, I think it's called the Song Bay River, the dividing line between north and south, and the DMZ. And every morning like clockwork, we'd all get up. Remember, we had one kid had a Canon camera with a 1,000mm lens on a tripod, and we picked the highest spot, and we could look through that, and you could see the NVA on the other side, and they would raise their flag, and we would raise our flag, And I know it's not funny, but it just seemed funny at the time. And they would shoot some mortar at us, and we would shoot some rounds at them. We would break for lunch. I don't know. It was just this little stylized kind of event. But no, those last 6 months were spent up and around the Z.
When did you actually leave Vietnam?
Oh, I have to look at my DD 214. It's around here somewhere. I do not remember the exact. It was April something, I think.
Okay.
There it is, somewhere there. It might say when I left country or left Vietnam or wherever that tape says.
Yeah, 30 April. Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you now the unit I think the unit that was up there, the division was the 5th Mechanized Division.
I don't know.
Because they were up there. Now and their artillery, among other things, supported the South Vietnamese foray into Laos, what they called Lamson 719. Were you still there when that was going on, or have any recollection
I
of that?
may have been. I tell you that one time I actually volunteered to go into the infantry. Well, because again, as I said earlier, if I was going to be in the war, I wanted to be in the war.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure how much war I wanted to be in. But after shooting artillery for a year or whatever it was, I thought, you know what? They're going into Cambodia or Laos. Maybe I'll go there just for the experience of it. I don't know why. I must have been nuts. But just for the experience, I actually volunteered. One time I actually got interviewed. I was going to drive a general's Jeep. I thought about that a long time. I'm not sure how much war I would have seen with a general, and I didn't get that job. And eventually they said, Aronson, you're going to be an artillery guy. Don't worry about it. We appreciate your volunteering, but so we didn't know where we were shooting. We weren't told about you're shooting in Cambodia or Laos or into North Vietnam or some other place. That's again, I was just a mechanic. I was shooting what I was told to shoot. You didn't ask any questions, and frankly, most of the time, you didn't have time to ask them. And if you did ask a question, what were you going to change anyway? Mm-hmm. I wasn't going to get them to change the fire mission, so.
Now, are there other things that kind of stand out in your memory about the stint with the last unit, or did that stuff kind of run together?
No. Well, yeah, I would say this. The war was winding down. There were problems. Some of this maybe not polite to talk about in polite company. So as I mentioned before, you had people who drank and people who used dope, and that, especially the dope, became more prevalent. Something I haven't mentioned yet, I guess I have to, is that you had the cultural differences. You had the African Americans who were not called African Americans at the time, so you had the blacks versus the whites. It was two worlds. It was a shock to me. To me, everybody was just everybody. We all just worked together to keep the bad guys off our back door.
Now, where or in what situations did you see the racial tensions play out? Where did you sense the...
It's hard to describe to you. They came from different parts of the country. If you had two kids who came from New York, one came from Brooklyn and one came from Harlem, it's two different countries. And so they brought those life's experience to Vietnam with them. Mm-hmm. And so, like most people do, you like to be around people like you, or at least people you can tolerate anyway. And so they came around people like them. So the country boys, the white Anglo-Saxon country boys, who, by the way, as I mentioned earlier, were the best soldiers I ever had. They kind of hung around because they knew about farming. They knew about country things. And the city slickers hung around each other. And the African Americans had common cultural experiences. And so they hung around each other. And as far as they were concerned, they were being used as fodder by the political system. They weren't happy about it. And they had their secret handshakes.
And the Black Power movement was going on.
And their afros and whatever. And so while we had a common cause of keeping each other alive, I remember when I was with the 105 unit, with the 101st, there was one fellow, in fact, he's in one of the films. I don't remember his name, but probably the only black guy I ever talked to. I just lived in a different world. And I didn't give a hoot. Believe me, in the middle of a battle, you don't care what color they are. But as the war wound down, and you started to get fragging, and I was in a unit where somebody tried to frag our sergeant major, I guess it was. For those people who don't understand it, basically an American using an American-made hand grenade or something like that, and throwing it or putting it in the hooch or home space of another American, trying to kill an American officer or an American sergeant. So we were having fragging, we had dope, we had drinking. Things weren't good. Things were... because you lost your... Everybody knew the war was winding down, but why was I still here? Mm-hmm. And why can't I go home? And I don't want to be the old cliche, you've heard this before, I don't want to be the last dead American. Nobody wanted to be the last dead one. I want to go home. And there were stories. There were stories of what used to call short timers.
Mm-hmm.
When you got short with your time, you had what's called a short timers calendar. All kinds of pictures were cut out, and you would block off each day. And there were stories of especially grunts who got sent on one last mission into the bush and got killed.
Mm-hmm.
And when those guys came out of the bush with that body, they weren't happy with the officers who sent them out there. And some of those officers were fragged, or at least threatened to be fragged anyway. Everybody was in a bad mood. They knew this thing was over. They knew we weren't winning. And nobody could see the light at the end of the tunnel. Wasn't white. It was kind of murky yellow. It was like, why were we here?
Mm-hmm.
We never knew why we were going, and now we don't know why it's ending. And as I told you many times during this interview, I was just doing what I was told to do.
Sure.
So things got a little ugly.
Now, as they did, I mean, was your unit, did it still function when it had to? When you got a fire mission, could you still carry that out?
Oh, sure. No, I still have no, maybe somebody else does, I have no recollection of anybody refusing to serve. If nothing else, they were serving themselves by saving their heinies.
Right.
What can you say?
Now, as your time wound down, were you ready to go?
I don't know. I'm sorry. I guess I'm too black and white. It was my time to go.
Okay.
I did my duty. It was time to go. It wasn't like I was ready to go. It was time to go.
All right. And now you are set up so that you're going to get discharged as soon as you get home, pretty much. So.
I flew out to, I think it's Fort Washington?
Fort Lewis in
Fort
Washington.
Lewis in Washington. There we go. Fort Lewis. Funny story. They fly us over there. We flew through Alaska, I think. No, it was Alaska on the way back the second
Yeah.
time. Coming back, I forget how we flew. It doesn't matter. We weren't paying attention, of course. As soon as we took off from Vietnam, we was smiling and laughing and happy and clapping. Anyway, so you get back, you land, you get processed out. I remember them giving me a medical. They said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Well, I was an artillery guy. My ear rings sometimes. My right ear still rings. It usually rings only if I'm tired, blood pressure's up. I don't have blood pressure, but if you're running, something happens, or if you're talking for 3 hours, or whatever I'm doing here." They determined I had maybe a 10% loss on the higher notes. It has not gotten worse over the years. I have tinnitus. I normally don't think about it. There are guys who get very bad.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, of course, was this, as I mentioned before, this spot on the top of my leg. There's nothing to see there. In fact, in the succeeding years, I've had bone scans, I've had x-rays, I've had MRIs, CAT scans, and they can't find anything. But I occasionally, for no reason, I used to run 5Ks. I would have no problem at all. I could be sitting in my chair doing nothing, watching TV, and I would get a pain. And I still say it's that truck I turned over in basic training and that thing. I'm convinced that's what it was. But we got mustered out. What happened, the funny story is, so you get a ticket to an airplane. So most of the plane is full of soldiers. And I sat down next to some kid. We were both going back to Pittsburgh. No idea who he was. And I can still hear it. 'Cause I fly a lot in my business. And they shut the door. And when they shut the door, it went whoomp. It sounded exactly like an 82 millimeter coming in. And both me and the kid next to me jumped up and hit our heads on the plastic baggage bins there, because we were so, like Pavlov's dog, we were so used to jumping from that sound, and we looked at each other and we laughed.
Okay. All right. Well, we had kind of gotten in the story basically to the end of the tour in Vietnam, and you talked. The last story that you told was one where you and another soldier heard a noise that sounded like a mortar in your heads inside the plane.
Yes.
Okay. Now, once you do get home,
Yes.
what do you do?
There's another $64,000 question. So I get home. I don't remember exactly, but the general, the rest of my life kind of went like this. I still want to tell you a few side stories at the end here, just to add some color to a few things. Get home, of course, nobody knew I was coming. And I actually came down, if I remember, I think I came down to the office, or where our office was at the time. And, my father, I guess, I guess he was glad to see me. I don't know, it was my father, it's just the way he was. And basically it goes like this. He says, well, what are you going to do now? Well, I don't know. And so he says, well, why don't you go to college where your brother's going to college? And I said, okay, got GI Bill, and I had been sending him some money because, again, I was raised with sports cars. I like sports cars. I was going to need a car, and there was a new car coming out called a Datsun 240Z, a real hot rod, I can tell you. And he had put down $100, I think, at 10 different dealerships to get me one of these things, and it was only $3,600 new. So I was going, and I got one eventually. It was bright orange. It was my version of a Corvette.
Mm-hmm.
So I got my car. My brother went to a place called Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York. He was going to school to get a degree in photography. I'd never heard of the place before, and I had no urge to go to school anywhere, actually. But what was I going to do? So I went to school as a business major. I got up there the first year. I got moved into an engineering fraternity. At RIT, the fraternities are not separate houses. The fraternities are parts of a dorm. I didn't know anything about fraternities. I can't spell the word engineer. I eventually became a house mother because I was older than everybody else. I'd been to the war and whatever, and the rest of them were engineers, they used to call themselves. I took classes, tried to stay awake. The second year, somebody landed a small plane on the grounds of the school because it's flatter than a pancake up there. They got permission from the FAA to do it. When I was in Vietnam, I flew around the helicopters a lot, especially with the 101st. It was fun. There's nothing like flying down over a bunch of trees with the door open, hanging out for your dear life, or under them, it was just great fun. And when this guy landed and jumped out and said, teach you how to fly $16 a wet, which means with fuel, that was before the original Arab oil embargo. So I started flying. I still do to this day. I haven't flown in a while, but I've many hours after all of that. But the second year, I was probably there for, I don't know, maybe 3 months. I just got up and left one day. I just got up and left. I had, doesn't sound nice, but after shooting at people, it wasn't very exciting. My father wasn't the type to give me some sense of direction. I wasn't told to grow up and be a brain surgeon or a garbage man or a plumber or an interview guy. Whatever, I wasn't told to do anything really. And there's a long story probably why my mother could tell you, which we won't get into here. So I had no sense of direction what I was going to do. My grades were only average at best, and I had no clue. So I just left one day, packed everything in the car and left. Came home. I expect my father probably wasn't real happy about that. Although I didn't hear about it. My mother probably did, unfortunately, but I did not. So I got myself a little apartment in a bad part of town where you do when you're young and don't have any money and don't know exactly what you're doing. I lived with a kid, roommate wanted kind of thing. Actually, he was a liquor control board agent. The part of town was so bad that he carried a little 38 with him as part of his job. I used to carry it with me when I went next door to do my laundry. It was interesting. But I got a job working at, I think I got a job at one of those cheese stores called, I can't think of the name of them.
Like Hickory Farms?
Hickory Farms.
Okay.
They opened up a cheese store at a strip mall here in Pittsburgh, south of Pittsburgh. I didn't even eat cheese, but I needed a job. So I helped them open a store, then they fired me because they didn't want me, they wanted a young lady to sell cheese. They wanted my labor. I was still strong from carrying artillery rounds, what can I say? I got a job at Arby's right downtown here in Pittsburgh. In fact, they just closed that Arby's and was there for 40 years. I was basically the first employee they hired. I remember the gentleman asking me, why do you want this job? And I said, well, I need a job and I like to eat. And so I did. I worked there for a while. I apologize, I don't remember all these dates, although I do remember one date. Eventually, I was living in some little dinky apartment. I was having a good time, actually. I worked from 6 a.m. to 2. I didn't have a girlfriend. I didn't have children. I was kind of, free and did what I wanted to do. And then after 2, I would get in my car, drive out to the airport, take flying lessons. It was the perfect life, all things considered. Eventually, except for the burns on my arms from cooking roast beef, but that's another story. So one day my mother called me and said, "Your father needs somebody at the office." Okay, that'd be typical of my father not to call me himself, of course. So I knew he was an insurance agent. I knew a little itty bitty teeny bit about the notary thing, microscopic bit. And but I can still remember, I came down, we were next door here, actually right where you parked the car. We were in that building. I walked into the office, then we had a little lobby. After we got to know each other for a minute, I wanted to know what I was doing and would I like to work there, and this is, if you're working there, this is what you're going to do. So I'd be making rubber stamps, notary rubber stamps, setting type, one little piece at a time, like Mr. Gutenberg, which I did, by the way, which gave me a very good proofreading eye, I can tell you. I made notary embossing seals with a hammer and something called a hob. Long story. Basically, I was Boy Friday. I did whatever I was told to do, just like the Army. I changed light bulbs, I changed the goo in the photocopier, I emptied waste baskets, I shipped things out, I made my uncle mad. I did what I felt, I did what I was told to do. And he told me if I would be in the mailroom manufacturing area for 5 years under the old English apprenticeship program, that he would bring me out to the front room, and eventually someday the company would be mine. Now it would be another 2-hour tape to go through to tell the whole long story of that, but that's where I started, and here I am. It'll be 42 years on September 16th.
All right. Now you wanted to fill in a few other kind of side stories about your service time.
Yeah, one's pleasant and one's not. There's probably some even, and I know, I bet you everybody you interview just says the same thing. 30 seconds after you walk out the door, they think of 14 more things they should have said.
That's just normal.
Very frustrating. And I was trying to think of things I should say, and maybe things I shouldn't say too. Not everybody's going to like what I say, of course. War has a strange beauty to it. I have never been so drunk in my life as I was in Vietnam. I remember being on a hill with the 101st, I forget which fire base, and it was, like you mentioned before, it was New Year's. We were drinking cheap whiskey at New Year's. It was either New Year's or July 4th. There was supposedly a truce. I don't know if anybody told the bad guys. They must have thought we were nuts. And at midnight, we all turned the guns up again, and the infantry boys had a flare. It was a long silver tube, like a really, really big cigar would come in. I don't smoke, but a big cigar. And you would take the metal cap off the end, put it on the other end, had a little point, and you whap it, and it would shoot a flare up in the air. And it was different colors, green and red and white and God knows what else. And they used them for whatever they used them for. And I always remember being on top of this hill. Of course, most of Vietnam is really flat, so being on top of a hill doesn't say too much, maybe, but being on top of this hill and looking out into the country, and you could see from here to I don't know where, and there was just flares of all these colors, and big ones and small ones, and tracers, hopefully our tracers, because they had the green ones, tracers and stuff. Everyone was just celebrating. I don't know what the heck we were celebrating. I guess we were alive for another year. I remember waking up the next morning with one boot off, one boot on top of a little bunk bed thing that we built in our hooch. I don't know who put me there. I don't know how we got there. We could have been overrun. I would have never known. I remember some kid during that taking one of those silver flares, holding it sideways, and shooting it right through one of our ammunition bunkers. It was like, are you kidding? Now, the truth is, even if it would have hit in there, it probably wouldn't have blown anything up. But it wasn't the smartest idea at the time. So, there were good times. And, of course, there are the proverbial bad times. I remember being in the, talk about ugly American. I wrote a story about this for a magazine once, or an editorial about it. I don't know if I still have it. I don't know why, but it's published somewhere. We were driving from point A to point B for reasons which don't matter anymore, in the back of a deuce and a half. For those of you who are listening, it's a big truck. They don't have them anymore in the Army. It's something else now. It had wooden stakes across. It's the same thing I turned over in basic training. And it had a canvas top on it. But in our case, the canvas was not on. And we're sitting being transported somewhere, and we were in traffic, and somebody had to go to the bathroom. One of our guys had to go to the bathroom. Broad daylight, just stood up, turns over to the side, exposes himself, and he goes to the bathroom, tinkles, if you will, and he tinkles right on top of people right on top of people driving by on a bicycle, right on them. And these Vietnamese ladies who got peed on, there's no better way to say it, as you can well imagine, they were horribly disgusting, screaming at us and yelling and whatever. It was, without question, the classic case of the ugly American. And half the guys were laughing, and some people weren't laughing, but nobody really yelled at them, because if you yelled at that guy who did that, you would probably get thrown off the bloody truck, because you called them bad names, and you were here to save yourself. You weren't here to save them. It was really the ugly American experience. It was the most ugly American experience that I probably personally saw, except for people lining up to have sex for some poor village girl somewhere. I'm trying.
Well, I have a basic question for you.
Yeah, sure. I want to leave this with one. I have one last thought, but go ahead.
And actually, it may tie into your last thought. I kind of generally ask, what do you think the effect of all this was on you? I mean, were you changed at all when you came out, or what did you take out of that experience?
God, is that hard to say? I don't know. It was certainly good. Let's go back to the white semi-Anglo-Saxon, white bread, quasi-spoiled, middle-class, not hungry boy from the suburbia, who certainly got a quick exposure to the real world. Not only to a foreign land, and I spent 2 R&Rs, one in Hong Kong and one in Australia, in Sydney, so I got exposure to there too, and foreign smells and sounds, but to people who are foreign to me because I didn't grow up in their neighborhood. It doesn't matter whether they're white or black. Again, I mentioned before, you had farm boys. I'd never been on a farm. You had African Americans who had never been to white suburbia, Pittsburgh, and so forth. All of that was certainly not bad. So when I came back, to the world, as you used to call it, things weren't as shocking to me as they were to my friends. I personally felt that, I know my one brother's still alive and will see this. I think it would have been a good experience for him too. I'm sure he doesn't want to hear it. I think it would have been a good experience for a lot of people. There's a cliche that, did it mature you? I don't know that I'm more mature. When I went to RIT for a short time, I still did stupid things. I still drank too much. I didn't study enough. It didn't make me a perfect person. It didn't make me more religious. It didn't make me, I was more educated in a certain kind of a way. War is hell. Somebody said I had my good days there. I had days, I remember one very embarrassing day, at least to me, where the incoming was such that not only did I have a flak jacket on, but I laid on, and there was another flak jacket. I took that flak jacket and I dragged it and put it on my legs. I did not want to get killed. And other people around me probably had much less support. And I shouldn't have done it, but I did it because it was just an intuitive thing. War is a strange thing. Many people had it, the infantry guys, some of them, not everybody, but some had it much worse. I never had to kill somebody in hand-to-hand combat. I never had to shoot somebody with my M16. I kind of shot them long range, even if they were 50 yards away. I remember one day, when I was 101st, we had a fire mission. I remember I was at the end of that hill, my version of it, end of the hill, and right down below, you couldn't see it, but down below we were told that there were 2 bad guys, with a mortar, and they were in a spider hole. It used to be a hole in the ground with a little cap on it, and every once in a while they would jump out of the hole. One guy would hold the mortar, the other guy would drop that, and they were shelling us, dinking us one little dink at a time, one little round at a time. And so a helicopter guy had seen this accidentally by flying by, said, "Hey, by the way, do you know they're just right down the hill from you?" And so Captain Rich came over, and we could say, "We got a fire mission, we got to kill those guys." And somehow we turned my gun around, and it was really pretty close. I'm not sure how we did it now. I can't remember whether we shot up to have it come down, or we aimed the gun down like this. But we shot a few rounds down there, and the helicopter guy reported back that we killed one of them. And the other guy disappeared. We probably killed both of them. That's as close as I ever came to hand-to-hand combat. Mm-hmm. Do I feel bad about it? I didn't feel bad about it now. I don't feel too bad about it I didn't feel bad about it then. I don't feel too bad about it now because if I didn't do that, I might not be here, which is maybe a selfish thing. But there is another side of me that does feel bad about it because that kid who was only doing what he was told to do, just like me, had a mother, a father, brothers, sisters, children, a wife, a girlfriend, who are all sorry to hear that he eventually died, or maybe never heard, and they might not know to this day what happened to that person. That is an unfortunate experience, and that's a bad thing. I had in my desk something my father gave me years ago. I wish I could remember now. It's in Latin. Lord knows I don't know Latin. As you can tell, I'm not very good with English. But it was something like sweet as war. Sweet as war for those who've never experienced it, or something like that. Mm-hmm. There is, I could dig it up for you. It would be a good title for a book, or at least a chapter. The kids who now play video games and all that, they just don't get it. I know I sound like an old fogey. I never wanted to be standing on this. I never wanted to be marching in a parade with a bunch of kids saying, "Oh, look, there's some old guy who used to fight in a war somewhere." Mm-hmm. I still have never marched in one of those parades. I never joined the Legion. I never joined the VFW, whatever it is. I never joined the idea of them. I wasn't running from anything. I just wasn't running to anything. Mm-hmm. I didn't need to spend years drinking with my war buddies. It wasn't important to me. It was something that I did. It goes kind of back to where we're getting in a circle here, but what you asked me. Did it change me? I don't know. Ask the people. My brother, who's going to hear this, will tell you that I'm still Sergeant Mark. That when it comes to managing, that I might not manage according to, Harvard principles of management. I come from between military school and the way my father was, and then the military itself. I come from the damn it, just do it department. We're not here to debate it. It's good. It's good for the business. It's good for the war. It was good for whatever. Just do it. Why? Because I said so. Because I would never tell you to do something which was bad for you. I would never knowingly tell you to jump out this window if I thought you were going to hurt yourself by jumping onto the deck here right outside this window. I'm doing it because I believe that it's good for you. It's good for my customers here at the business. It's good for our employees. It's good for society as a whole. But I'm not good with, believe me, I am on committees on other organizations I belong to. But even there, I'm probably not that good. I used to do marketing on a volunteer effort for another organization I belong to. And the one lady that's my co-chair is going to see this. And for years I did it on my own. As the organization was a very small group. Started with 40 people. Now it's over 500, which isn't that big, but it's big for what it does. And I was doing marketing for membership. I was trying to get more members because it's what I do here, or what I have done here anyway. I know something about it, at least I thought I did. And eventually, as I grew, they started to give us money. There was a budget. I wasn't used to that kind of thing. And so I got a young lady assigned to me who was another member, and it wasn't given to me. I said, well, Kay's going to help you. She's going to be your co-chair. Well, that's not really what was going on. They were trying to keep me under. It wasn't that I was doing bad things. I was just doing things that I felt like doing because I thought I was going to get more members that way. And in retrospect, the board of directors of that organization was probably going, how do we get this kid under control? So perhaps the war changed me in that way. That I was reacting, you don't have time to think. Or if you do think, you think real fast. And even to this day, when we do things in this office or with other groups I belong to, I have to bite my tongue or my toe or something. I don't have the patience to wait. I want to offer a new service. I want to do it tomorrow. What are you waiting for? Can't you see it the way I see it? Do it tomorrow, please. Anyway, that's a little tirade to answer your question, but that's probably how it affected me, I suppose. I don't know. You would have to talk to my fiance or my mother or my friends, and they would probably have different perspectives.
All right. And then you had a thought that you would wanted to throw in here at the end, I think.
Well, maybe one. I mean, it may not mean anything at all. In my life, I've had two quiet moments, and almost, again, I'll be 65 here September 8th. I've probably only had two moments of peace, two what do they call them, Zen moments. I've had two. all those years, you could tell from interviewing me, I'm a little wound up. I don't sit still easily. I walk around all day, even here. I'm always doing something. My brain is, well, I would say it's always thinking, but that's subjective, of course. But I'm talking to you. I see the trees moving out behind the window. I see the flag waving by the stadium. I see cars moving by the bridge. I see your son over here on the left. I hear somebody in the lunchroom getting a cup. It's really, really difficult for me to reach some kind of a completely peaceful, quiet, what is life all about moment. First one, not the first one, the one I'm going to tell you about first, was one moment flying a small plane, a single-engine plane. I eventually did get my license. I got a multi-engine, instrument-rated, whatever. I have about 1,700 hours now. I flew for years and years for the business stuff mostly. A little bit of pleasure, although flying is a pleasure. It's the most relaxing thing I do, by the way. Probably because I'm in control. Goes back to that sergeant thing, doesn't it? Anyway, I was flying back over West Virginia, and I was over Morgantown, West Virginia one night, flying back to Pittsburgh. I was at 8,000 feet. The sky was perfectly clear. It was a small plane. I forget which one it was now. It didn't have an autopilot. And I was, you kind of sit with your hand on the wheel and your feet on the rudders and watching for traffic and casually listening to the radio chatter, if there is any chatter. And it was just silky smooth. And I actually was able to take my hands off the yoke and just sit here really just like this. And for I don't know how many minutes, it just flew all by itself. There was just the quiet drone. I wear headsets. Just the quiet drone of the engine. Nobody was on the radio. The plane wasn't going up or down or left or right. I remember to this day. It was just a beautiful moment. The only other time was in Vietnam, of all places. One morning, during the middle of all this battle. This was actually after July 1st, I think. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't always noisy, of course. Even the bad guys have to have lunch or breakfast or something. You know what? It was before July 1st. It was before. I was up on top of the hill. I don't know, I pulled night shift, whatever I was doing. And I was sitting on top. We had these culverts, and we had sandbags, and we had the rounds inside. And it was probably 5:35 when the sun was coming up. Sitting on top of there, cross-legged, and staring out, and I could see all the way out to the South China Sea. And because we were on a hill, all the clouds were below us, maybe 100 yards below us. So it was just me, this mound of dirt, me, all the way out to the South China Sea. A few little bumps coming through the clouds here and there of other hills, I don't know where they were, far off, and nothing. There was not a helicopter anywhere. There wasn't a gun being shot, no matter what size. There was no other human beings making a noise that I could hear. It was just beautiful. It was unexpected. It was very strange. And of being in Vietnam for 18 months, what sticks with you? That probably is certainly one of the most remarkable moments, if not the most remarkable moment, of sitting there and looking out. It was clean because the white clouds, they were white. You couldn't see, you couldn't hear. There wasn't anything to smell. There wasn't any burning human waste. There wasn't gunpowder. There wasn't food. It was as perfect as a moment could get, as far as I am concerned. Some Zen Buddhist nun would be proud of me. It was that New Yorker, cliche on top of the hill, giving advice kind of a thing. It was a gorgeous moment. It really was. I would just maybe close this by saying that so I came back from the war and I did all these things you're talking about. I didn't think about it too much. People would ask me stories, and I've never been shy about talking about it. The other goosebump moment, and it still gives me goosebumps. So when I first found out about what I still call the Survivors Association, 28 years go by. I know nothing about Survivor Association, nothing, because I wasn't hanging around. I didn't make any friends. It wasn't like I went home and I had a friend in Ohio that I would call and say, hey, want to get together? We were in Vietnam together. Yeah, none of that happened. I went back to life. 28 years later, after 16 years and a month of marriage, I'm divorced or in the process of divorce. I'm living in a little apartment in the South Hills of Pittsburgh by myself. And a phone answers. Phone rings one night. And I pick it up before cell phones, you know, a phone, a real phone. And I pick it up, and some guy says, "Are you Marc Aronson?" And you know, being the wise guy I am, I'm going, "Well, you know, maybe. Who are you? Who are you? And what do I owe you? You know, why do you want to know?" And he says, "Well, my name is Keith Nolan, and I'm writing a book about Ripcord." And he did. I talked to him for 2 hours, and he couldn't get me to shut up. And I had extreme goosebumps. And it wasn't like I hadn't talked about it before, but this was different. And I sent him some emails, and I had on my desk for 2 years, he sent me a questionnaire, and would you know, please fill it out? I never did. And it wasn't like I had some emotional thing going on, you know. I don't jump when cars backfire. I don't dive under tables. I don't have to go to the VA for emotional help or physical help, thank God. But that phone call will never be forgotten. And I never filled that thing out to my regret. So in the book, I'm noted as a source. I'm not sure I would have written anything that anybody else would have said anyway. And I went to one reunion 2 years later in Shreveport. It was the 30th reunion. Because most of the guys are infantry, didn't really know anybody. Rich showed up, Captain Rich showed up, so I recognized him when I saw him. I don't know that I recognized anybody else, but everybody was nice, of course. So I kind of hung around, and you know, I stayed, I think it was a few days maybe. But I don't know, I didn't feel an emotional attachment to the people. I felt the emotional, except for maybe Rich a little bit, teeny bit. It was the emotional attachment to the concept, to the event, to the era. The next year, I think they were in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, which is that way by small plane, only an hour. And I actually happened to be in Harrisburg to teach a class on the business that I do with the guy who was my flight instructor. And they were at whatever hotel. And I said, you know what, let's go over and check it out. I didn't sign up, but nobody's going to send you away. And I walked over, and they were having, you know, the meetings that people do at meetings. And of course, as I think I showed you before, I had my little coin that they gave me, so I could prove that I was actually there, because nobody has one of these. You know, family members don't get these things. You got to be shot at basically to get one of these things. And I hung around for a little while, but you know what? I only stayed for a few hours. I mean, I had business to do too, but it was like I looked in the room. I didn't see anybody I noticed. Maybe it's just me. I'm just not the kind of guy to sit down with a beer and a cigar and talk to people. And I just left. I didn't even say goodbye. I just left. And will I go back? It's always a big question. I did have an email with a guy last year, I forget his name, sorry, who I sent him an email about the problem, my word, of being a red leg, of being an artillery guy in a room with a whole bunch of infantry guys. This isn't going to sound nice, but I had a perception, I could be very wrong. In fact, he told me that I was wrong, that the infantry guys thought that, well, you artillery guys really didn't have it that bad. You were not in the bush, you know, wrestling somebody hand to hand. That's right, I wasn't. And I did volunteer, and I didn't get accepted for it, so what? And maybe it's a good thing I didn't. And you didn't have to shoot somebody. And that's right, I didn't directly do that. And I'm not going to apologize for it. And I just felt that maybe these guys just didn't think that I should be there anyway. I did send an email to this, when I saw the list of people who attended last year, I sent an email to this one gentleman who was also in my same unit. I don't remember his name right now. I've only found a few of them. I didn't look for them, but seen a few of them. And he said, well, you know, he found somebody else. And he said, you really ought to come down. I think it's Myrtle Beach this year in October. And he said, you ought to come down, because at least there'll be 4 of us that can sit at the same table and talk about common And I actually have that on my Outlook calendar here in the office. They came up the other day because I'm going to have to plan, although for me it's a short flight down.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I may send this guy another email, and I might go down for a day, just to say, because he was kind enough to write back. I still feel maybe that obligation, but I don't have the urge to stay there for a few days. I just don't know that I have much to talk about with people. I don't know if I have enough in common with them. Otherwise, I'll probably see if I can hang around long enough to the 50th and go to the 50th, because everybody goes to their 50th, high school or college or whatever it is. So maybe I'll hang around. If I live long enough, I'll go to the 50th, just because by that time, nobody's going to care what branch you're in. If you're still alive, they'll be happy to see you.
All right.
And that's probably what I know.
Okay. I think that makes a good note to close on. So I'd just like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me.
Oh, you're welcome, sir. It's been a pleasure. It really has.